We are live.
Good afternoon. I hope that everyone has had a productive summer so far and engaged in a lot of politics around the state thus far. We see a lot of political signs all over the place, and I know that you're inundated with large amounts of campaign material. We're going to get back to work today to get engaged in the major business for our board. But before we go to that, I want to introduce a few people because some of you may not know the board members who are with us today. And I hope that we can click so that people can get an opportunity to see who's participating with us today. First of all, our vice chair, Britt Curran. Are you there, Britt?
I am indeed.
Thank you, Britt. Dr. Doss, are you there? I sent it to you.
I think she's joining a
Okay.
little late.
Okay. The other two I want to introduce because they will be facilitators for today. It's Joe Manko, who will be our first facilitator on the first pillar for today. Joe?
Hey, everyone.
Okay. And Laura Sableton? Dr. Sableton, are you here?
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here as well. We have a set of new advisory members, board advisory members, and unfortunately, due to Zoom and the COVID restrictions that we've had over the last several months, we've not had an opportunity to meet all of them personally. So we're going to take this opportunity so that we can put a face to the names that recognize our new board of advisors. So why don't we identify, if we can, those advisory members who are part of today's discussion.
Mr. Manko, did you want to do that?
Yeah, so I can definitely do that. And I'm just going to go through and name a handful of folks that were both registrants and then are also on the advisory board. So hopefully they are able to, they are here and we're able to see them. So the first of which is representing Pillar 1 is Linda Kronberg Quinn and Raina Miller. So two of the advisory committee members that are providing input on Pillar 1. For Pillar 2, we have three advisory committee members that have registered, one being Patricia Twitty, the other one of our student representatives, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, but it's Omani Diallo, and then the third being John Selke, and then representing the advisory committee overseeing providing input on Pillar 4 is Jaden Ferris. So those are the advisory committee members that have registered for today's meeting, and hopefully they are in the session today. So back to you, Ike.
Thank you. Let me get a few details out of the way before we get started into our major task for today. As you may recall, we had a series of meetings over the spring to better familiarize the board with best practices, not only here in the United States, but literally around the world. I thought they were quite informative. We brought in some very good speakers to help us to better understand the motivation, any concerns that we may have had in terms of interpretation, to give us a sense of what the blueprint was intended to accomplish, where we stood in terms of where the state stands today, as well as how we are tracking around the world. I thought the speakers and those who presented for us did an outstanding job. And so today we're taking it to step 2. And before we go to step 2, a couple of reminders. Number one, all of this is being live streamed. And we probably have, how many, Rachel? At least 100 participants in this meeting today.
Probably
so,
around 150, actually. Yes.
All right, about 150 participants today. That's a fairly large number who we want to engage in some meaningful fashion throughout this entire process. Our intent is to be as comprehensive as possible, to engage the public, to have as much transparency as possible. But in order to do that, it will require your participation. And so we've laid out a few protocols, things that we want to achieve and to do. But we have to keep in mind that we have a deadline to present a comprehensive plan in December. And for us to do that, we want your participation, but we have to follow pretty close to the protocols. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for us to achieve the objectives in time we want to achieve them. In many ways, this is building the plane as we're flying. And so for those of you, including myself, who've been part of other boards, other task force that have been long-standing, you already have the standard operating procedures. You've already had a series of meetings, and you're following the familiar path. This is a new board. We're undertaking a fairly comprehensive plan to achieve the objectives of the blueprint. But in order to do so, do not assume that all of this is written in stone, that we have the process down flat. But we're trying to achieve a number of things. So we want to make certain that the transparency is there, the participation is there, but there may be some bumps along the way. We may have to change some things as we go forward in order to ensure that we get the participation, but to meet the deadlines as well. Now, one of the things that we're not going to do, this is not an attempt to go back to relitigate the blueprint. The blueprint has been passed by the General Assembly. I'm not suggesting that that is written in stone, but the approach that I've taken in the board is that we intend to follow the blueprint as best as possible. If there are some changes, adjustments we need to make, then we'll seek to do so. But there will be a very strong presumption that what we have in the blueprint is what we should follow. To overcome that presumption will take an awful lot of work and insight and, I think, persuasion to ensure that we not drift off course. It's not to suggest that we will not find places where we'd have to make adjustments, but we're not going to start immediately making adjustments. We're going to start with the idea that we're going to follow the blueprint. And to the degree that we have some alterations, we'll make those along the way. But I've heard from a number of people who contacted me directly suggesting changes. And I've heard those, and many of the ideas are quite good, but I think we need to follow the process as it's outlined for us now. And then there will be a point in time for us to look at where we are and to make adjustments as we go forward. I believe that this plan has some challenges. This plan would not be easy to implement. We have some very tight timelines to achieve. We want to make sure that we examine all of those, and make sure we get not only the tasks, but the subtasks, and make sure we have the resources available for us to do that. We want to make sure that we've identified all of the primary elements that I think are needed in order to implement this, but also the resources that are going to be needed. So an awful lot that we're going to try to cover in a relatively short period of time. With a committee or group of over 150 today, there's no way for us to get everyone participating, but we hope to have you join us and ask questions and make comments. You can do so by simply typing in and ensure that we get your questions adjusted. We may call on a few people for a few questions here or there and answer comments, but in order to get all of this done, we can't entertain everyone with the level and the number of people that we have. The process may adjust somewhat as we go forward. Is my expectation that we can get through all of the things that are listed on today's agenda, but we may not be able to get to all of it. If need be, we'll carry through to a subsequent date to ensure that we cover those items at a later date. It is anticipated that where we have some real challenges or questions that we need to have a deep dive into, then we will have some smaller groups, committees that will flesh those out, come back to the larger group, discuss that and make final recommendations. All of that will be transparent. All of that will be something you can participate in. All of that will be something that you will know going forward. So we want to make sure, A, transparency, B, as much of the participation by all of those involved as best as possible, but we have to meet the timelines that are outlined for us. We will entertain changes if need be, but there's a very strong presumption that we're going to follow this plan as best as possible. I think I've covered most of our general goals here for today, Rachel, and I think we need to go now to some of the protocols. If you want to just go through those in details right quick, and then we'll go right on to the following contributions and the program for today, which will be led by Joe Manko. Joe's taking the first stab at this today, and Laura will do the second pillar a little bit later on after the break. So why don't we pick up with the goals and we'll proceed from that part.
Sure. So Emma, if you could just go back for a brief moment to the previous slide. So essentially what we're going to be doing is working our way through the graphics for Pillar 2 here in the first part of the meeting, and essentially drilling down further into more detail around what is involved in implementing each of the tasks in that Pillar 2 and then Pillar 5 of the blueprint, and discussing any questions that arise around the implementation, considerations that perhaps are not part of the plan right now, timelines that either are not specified right now in the plan or perhaps need to be adjusted. And that is the participation that we're eager to get from the public and all of the stakeholders on this meeting. In terms of protocols, we ask that everyone participating keep their cameras off and stay muted. And if you have any questions or comments that you want to raise, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. We're going to be monitoring the chat box throughout the meeting, and Mr. Manko or I will either express the comment or question in the box, or call on the persons who put it in the box to explain further what they would like to ask or raise. And so that's how we're going to try to proceed here. This session, the first session, is scheduled to go until 2:30, I'm sorry, 3:30. As the chair mentioned, we likely don't anticipate that we'll be able to cover every question or comment that is put in the chat box, given the number of people are participating, but we're going to be taking very good notes. We've got a number of staff who are going to be taking very good notes so that we make sure that we follow up on any questions or comments that need further discussion or need follow-up information, and we'll bring a thorough list back to the next working session on Pillar 2. This is just the first of several, and the next session is going to be scheduled for August 4th. At 1 p.m. So we already have identified the next meeting date for Pillar 2. And I think that covers the protocols. The next item, we were just gonna briefly go over Pillar 2 and what Pillar 2 is. And I'm gonna ask Emma Pellerin, who is the Implementation Plan Director for the AIB, if she would do that briefly.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rachel. So I want to just quickly share, if you haven't seen this graphic already, this illustrates the 5 different pillars that are part of the blueprint for Maryland's future. So you may have already seen these, and you are hopefully familiar with them from our implementation planning series. I hope that you all had a chance to tune into that in the spring. So for today's session, similar to the implementation planning sessions, we're just going to be focusing on 2 pillars. Pillar 2, that's high quality and diverse teachers and leaders. And then pillar 5, governance and accountability. So first we'll be, as Rachel said, focusing on pillar 2. And I just wanted to quickly review the major objectives that are that pillar 2 encompasses. That is to increase the rigor of educator licensure and prep programs, to improve educator compensation and working conditions, to institute new recruitment and professional development efforts and create a more diverse educator workforce, to establish a new statewide educator career ladder to continually improve professional practice and student performance, and to implement a more comprehensive in-service educator training and professional development program. So we're excited to dig into these today, and I'm going to actually switch over to a graphic, which many of you probably already have seen in the meeting materials, that will break this down further into what we call tasks and subtasks. So I'm going to switch back over to Rachel and Joe, and we'll go from there.
Great, thank you, Emma. While Emma's switching over to that, just for anyone who is not aware, all of the meeting materials are posted on the General Assembly website. And if I could ask one of the AIB staff to drop a link into the chat for anyone who needs to be able to access that, that would be great. Thank you. And so as Emma discussed and just reviewed, Emma reviewed what we're considering the major tasks under Pillar 2. So Pillar 2 is high quality and diverse teachers and leaders. And what we're going to do here is just start working our way down through this document in more detail and pause after each task. So just to get our terminology, the 2.1 recruit.
Before you go on,
yeah.
Was there anything you wanted to say, add before we get to those points, Joe?
No, I think we're moving along nicely. So yeah,
Okay.
Thanks for checking in.
All right.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, so Pillar 2, 2.1 is the first, what we're referring to as an objective of Pillar 2. So 2.1 is the objective to recruit and maintain a high quality and diverse teacher workforce. The next row, 2.1.1, is the first task under that objective, which is to implement a statewide marketing campaign to attract high quality and diverse teaching candidates. And to the right, you can see the timeline, which goes from fiscal 22 out through fiscal 32. And as a reminder, fiscal 32 is the last year under the blueprint statute that the AIB is in existence. After that point, it will be a determination of whether the AIB needs to continue to exist or whether the blueprint has been fully and successfully implemented. And then you can see in fiscal 22, there is a yellow back arrow. And what that indicates is that this task began before fiscal 22. In this case, it began in fiscal 20 is when funding was first provided for this campaign to MSDE. And this was part of 2018 legislation that is sort of known as the Bridge to Kerwin legislation, or Bridge to Blueprint. And it identified some first policy initiatives that could be implemented before the commission's work was completed. The Kerwin Commission's work was completed. And so then below 2.1.1, which again is the task, are a number of what we're calling subtasks. So these are essentially the different elements that have either been identified in the statute or other by the commission as necessary to implement the task. And so you can see from 2.1.1a through I are the subtasks that have been identified at this point for this campaign. And what we're trying to do here is also identify, if it's clear in the statute or in the commission report, who is responsible for implementing the task or subtask. And so in this case, the marketing campaign, MSDE is responsible for implementing the campaign. And you can see there are a number of elements that are specified for MSDE to implement the campaign, including establishing a diverse steering committee to help guide the plan or the campaign, including specifically the statute refers to representatives from historically Black colleges and universities. MSDE builds a digital recruitment platform and an outreach program that is focused on students from teacher candidates from historically underrepresented populations, and also subject areas that are experiencing teacher shortages, which is just about everything, I think, right now in this current COVID world. And I'm not going to read all of these to you, but you can see that MSD is tasked with.
Do we have any a sense of, because some of these things, I think, at least I thought, were already in progress and had some level of participation. Do we have a sense of which ones they are engaged in and how they would reflect on the timelines that we discussed earlier?
That is an excellent question, Mr. Chair. And I do know that MSDE has been engaged in a number of these activities. And I believe that there are some folks from MSDE who could speak to this. Yeah. If we can have someone turn on their camera and unmute.
I believe that Kelly Meadows is here. Kelly, are you here? And would you be willing to give a brief update?
I am. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So this particular initiative, as you stated, is something that we've been doing since 2018. In 2018 and 2019, we did bring together a steering committee as required in the law and met several times. And that steering committee, along with MSDE, initiated a plan of implementation. Some of the highlights that I'd like to mention with regard to these tasks, we have engaged since that time and still continue to engage in a digital recruitment campaign that is a mixture of free and paid for advertising in several different social media platforms. We also invested in a partnership with the Maryland Transportation Authority. Hopefully those of you who live in some of our urban areas saw our advertisements. Everything is branded, I should say, in Teach in Maryland. It's the Teach in Maryland campaign that we've branded. And so hopefully you saw some of that branding on the sides of buses, metro enclosures, that type of thing. We've invested in some digital billboards around the state, especially in our eastern.
Let me interrupt for 1 minute, please.
Sure.
We don't need to go through each one of the details of the campaign, but I wanted a sense of looking at this. What, if any, things that maybe you have not done, anticipate doing, or you're engaged in doing as a whole, rather than to go through each detail. We don't have enough time to go through the entire marketing campaign, but I want a sense of what you have done and what you anticipate doing as it relates to the items that you are identified as to proceed on.
Absolutely. So each one of these items we have moved forward, and we are still actively participating and addressing every single line item on the screen right now in different ways.
Do you have a timeline that they can share with us at some later point so that we could have an idea when some of these things will be done, or what is outstanding in order to complete them?
So they are currently being done. We don't have an end date. As long as it's continued to be funded, it is our plan to continue doing these things. We are planning, there's one thing that we are planning to do during fiscal year 23 that is outstanding, and that is having our second annual Teach in Maryland conference for Maryland high school students to recruit them into the teaching profession.
Hey, Kelly, there's a comment that has shown up in the chat about, is there a role for higher education in the recruitment campaign? So any, I guess, feedback or ideas on ways that we can involve higher education or need for involvement from higher ed?
Absolutely. Not only was higher ed a part of the steering committee, but a good example is the conference. Very collaborative partnership with all of our educator preparation programs. Every single one participated the first time we had it, and I expect that they will the second time around. And then there are some other smaller initiatives that we have done in partnership with our ed prep programs.
And I guess also, Kelly, and so if we're going through, and I guess my strategy is maybe to kind of tackle this sub-object or, sub-object by sub-object. So within the 2.1.1 area of the kind of big picture graphic, anything in there of all of the elements, like not going element by element, but anything that you want to highlight that is either a struggle or a challenge that you could use additional support with, or things that you want to elevate that you feel like have been, that are moving forward well and have been pretty successful. And then we'll also keep looking at the chat to see what else gets elevated. But
yes, I will say that one of the things that I think we continue to struggle with, and hopefully we're getting better at this, is how do we, and I saw that it's in the chat, how do we make the best of the partnership between the LEAs and the State Department, in that, we have these funds and we are going to spearhead this initiative, but we're not the employer of teachers in Maryland. So how can we work with 24 different partners to message in this campaign in a way that is helpful for all 24? I think that's one of the challenges that we're constantly grappling with.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Cohen.
Yeah. So Kelly, has there been any evidence that the campaign is having an impact? In other words, it's one thing to have a campaign, but are you tracking, measuring the success of the campaign?
Mm-hmm. So I don't want to give you misinformation. I can't really speak to that completely at this point. I will tell you that it is a challenge to make the connection between a specific campaign and initiative, and whether that ends with an employment application or an enrollment into an educator preparation program. There definitely is a disconnect there. And I think that we would need a better infrastructure for data collection in order to really tackle the effectiveness of that.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that would be important, because otherwise we're just spending money and not knowing if it's doing any good. So I would certainly encourage some more thought on how to measure the effectiveness of the campaign, so you can modify it if it's not being effective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, I have one question for Rachel. Rachel, we are the Accountability and Implementation Board. So how are we going to, we've heard a nice report from Kelly. They're doing work on all these things, but don't we need a record of that somehow, a report to document that these things have been done?
So I think that ultimately the idea would be that the AIB is going to adopt a comprehensive plan, and then all of the entities who are responsible for implementing portions of the plan will develop their own plans that they will submit in March of 2023, and that includes MSDE and the Higher Education Commission and teacher preparation programs and all sorts of entities, aside from the LEAs, which is, I think, what we tend to focus on. And then that plan will be subject to AIB approval. So I think that what we want to be thinking about with these questions is not necessarily whether these things have already been done, like evaluating the effectiveness, but essentially, and I think that's an excellent point, we would add a new subtask to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of the outreach campaign and the program, the outreach program and the campaign that MSDE is implementing to see if it's effective. And that could be part of what MSDE provides in their plan back to the AIB. And as part of this process, we would add that as a subtask. And we would also then, if they could provide an annual update through their blueprint plan, we could establish a date, by when, a first update could be provided, because I think, to Kelly's point, it will take a little work to determine how to measure that, and then to make sure the data is being collected.
If I can just jump in a second here. This shows the clear connection between Pillar 5, the governance and accountability pillar, and the work that's being undertaken for all the other pillars. So that fifth pillar, which we'll talk about later today, will have this discussion about all of the elements that we need to examine or measure over time, and the plan to evaluate those. So stay tuned.
We have a couple other questions that we wanted to surface. One is from Janine, which is just quickly, will there be additional scholarships available for college tuition for students who agree to teach in Maryland schools?
So if I could take a first stab at that, I saw that in the chat, and you can see in 2.1.1G, part of the marketing campaign and outreach is to increase awareness around the state of the incentives that are available for students pursuing a teaching program in Maryland. And below, if we can just move because of this question, we'll move on to the next task, which is in 2.1.2, which is funding for the Maryland Teaching Fellow Scholarship to encourage highly skilled and diverse candidates to teach in high need schools. So this is a scholarship program that was actually created back in, I believe, 2016. Funding was mandated for the program beginning in 2018 at $2 million. And the blueprint increases that funding. It phases the funding up. And so for fiscal 23, there is $8 million available for this scholarship, and that phases up to $18 million in fiscal 25 and continues on at that higher level of $18 million for as long as needed. The Teaching Fellow Scholarship is essentially a full ride scholarship, and students who accept the scholarship agree to teach in a high need Maryland school for at least 1 year for each year that they receive the scholarship. And I believe that there is someone from the Maryland Higher Education Commission who may be able to speak a little more to this in terms of the usage of the scholarship so far.
Rachel, this is Emily Dow from NHEC.
Hi, Emily. Thank you.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I am Emily Dow. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Academic Affairs at the Maryland Higher Education Commission. We were able to provide some or pull some rough numbers regarding the scholarship. That we may be off by a student or two. I need to get some clarification on a couple of the data points, but generally speaking, for fiscal year 2020, we awarded 62 students the scholarship, 158 applied, 93 awards were made, and 62 were actually dispersed. I'm not in a position right now to really provide clarification between what happens between an application to awarding when funds get dispersed. And I will be prepared at a later meeting to speak on that. But it gives you kind of a rough sense of how many awards are being made. So that was fiscal 2020. Fiscal 21, about 260 applicants, about 100 awards made, and about 100 awards dispersed. Difference of maybe just a couple of students. And like I said, I don't want to give you specifics, but gives you a sense. And then this past year, fiscal year 2022, about 300 applicants, 108 awards, and 105 dispersed.
So Emily, it's fair to say that the program is gaining in notoriety and popularity, more applicants each year. And then do you have any information or data on the percentage of either applicants or recipients that were people of color?
That not in the immediate. If you give me just maybe 3 minutes, I can pull that up. I don't want to keep you holding, but I can come back to you in just a few minutes.
Great. I guess while we're holding on that, there was a question that was put in the chat by Jeffrey Marr, and I wanted to see if, Jeffrey, you have the ability to come off the camera and maybe just ask your question to the group.
Yeah, my question is really about like I appreciate the information about the scholarships and the ways that we're trying to entice people to go into the field. But as we have this conversation, I want to make sure that we're also bringing in all of our partners who support the teacher ed programs to recruit them in those early years. We're seeing, fewer numbers of students graduate with teaching credentials at a time when the needs are growing exponentially. And so how do we address that gap between a shrinking teacher ed program or the numbers coming out of them and that growing need that all of our school systems feel?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know if either some of our friends from MSDE or if Rachel wants to chime in on that at all, or maybe it's something that is just for continued discussion, because I know this is top of mind for so many people that are in the room currently.
It's certainly, it's an even more pressing issue now than it was when the commission was talking about this. And I think there's no single one answer that is going to address that. It's going to be the combination of efforts, some of which are laid out in the blueprint, including, increasing compensation, professionalism, paths to moving up in the career for teachers so that more students see it as a career they want to pursue. There may be other, I'm sure there are plenty of other things that are not already in the blueprint that folks have ideas about. And I see some are in the chat box, and we can sort of call some of those out. I mean, I think one thing that's been discussed is sort of trying to increase the pathways for teachers, whether it's through some sort of apprenticeships or CTE programs in high school that help them to get onto the right path to be able to become a teacher. And also one thing that came up at the last AIB meeting is like creating pathways particularly for perhaps paraprofessionals, educator support personnel who are in the schools now who are interested in becoming teachers, to try to remove the barriers to that so that they can pursue and meet all the requirements that every other teacher has to meet, but to be able to pursue that, while they're also still trying to make a living.
I mean, I also, in that same vein, wanted to elevate Lori Mullen's comments at Towson University, working on recruitment plans that focus on high school students, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, as well as transfer students. And I know I also, would be remiss to not mention the focus by MSDE and the Maryland Leads program on grow your own models. I don't know if Ari or anybody else from the MSDE team have any updates on those efforts, because I know those are just so well welcomed in the state, and you put a big emphasis on that. So any updates on progress on that front?
No, thank you for the connection. That's great, very helpful, and absolutely right. We are, as I think you probably all know, the superintendent is very, very focused on this, particularly on investing in grow your own programs to diversify and expand the workforce. And so that was one of 7 high priority strategies that we funded through the Maryland Leads program. We've had districts, all 24 districts are participating in the program and are receiving funding. And this is money that we are using from our federal funds, our ESSER elementary and our COVID relief funding that the state has designed in these ways. So the money is just in the process of being awarded. Districts are just starting to get underway. We've had grow your own partnerships launched across the state. And if you, I'll play the, I think it's Emily's card, and say, if you want to give me just a minute, I can certainly come back to you with any addition, with a few numbers that I don't have right in front of me, but would be happy to do that in a few minutes.
Yeah, that would be great. And I saw Emily come off of camera for a second. So I don't know if, Emily, do you have some good data for us? Oh, you're muted.
I do. Thank you. Again, with the caveat, these are rough numbers. We can certainly provide more official counts for you. For 2020 and 2021, about 10% of the recipients were Hispanic, any race. And in 2020, about 25% of the recipients were African American or Black. And in 2021, about 30% of the recipients were African American or Black.
Very good. Thank you so much for getting those numbers for us so quickly.
Absolutely. And again, rough estimate, but they are fairly within the range. They're not going to be off huge, but I will make sure we can get a formal count to you all. And I did see Dr. Henry's question. I can't answer that question in terms of how money is allocated and if there's leftover funds, what happens to those funds. But I can certainly get some information and get back to you all.
I did just do some back of the envelope math, and I think it's safe to say that all the funding in the program to date has not been awarded, and that there's definitely a lot more room. I mean, it seems like we're basically ending up around 300 applications and about 100 scholarships for the last couple of years, which raises 2 questions. One, what are the challenges with the folks who aren't receiving the award who apply, and whether there's room, something we can work on further, whether that, there's something, changes that are needed to the scholarship program or the application process or whatever. And then the other question would be, based on 100 students, I would say that probably not even $2 million a year is probably going out the door. So probably more like $1 million. So we can get real data on that. As I said, I'm just doing back of the envelope math here and follow up on those questions. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's great to definitely put a pin in and to come back to, because yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of room to maneuver here and a lot of space to grow. I think Emily, while we have you on the while we have you on the line, as we kind of move down objective 2.1 and look at 2.1.4, can you talk to us a little bit about the teacher quality and diversity program, where things stand with that? I guess in any of these sub-objects, A through E, anything you want to highlight as kind of updates, areas that you feel like we're either struggling in, that we need that you could use additional thought partners or collaborators in, and then also maybe elevating some areas where we've had some breakthroughs and some successes.
If I could just, before Emily speak, just provide a little bit of context. This is a brand new program that was created in the blueprint as another way to improve the diversity and quality of our teacher candidates and support students from historically underrepresented populations. And so the program is essentially just now coming into existence as of, I guess, July 1.
Good to know.
So
how's the maturation of the program?
It is on our radar. I am not in a position right now to provide much information on it, but again, I can talk internally and see where we're at and come back at a future meeting and provide updates. I think generally speaking, I think the challenge in hearing some of the opening remarks and commentary in previous meetings is the collaboration effort. We have our colleges and universities doing really good work. We have our agency doing outreach for not only this scholarship, but a variety of other scholarships that are workforce focused. And then of course, the work that MSDE is doing. So I think as we move ahead, as MHEC, Maryland Higher Education moves ahead, it's going to be all the more imperative that any work we do in this reign of ensuring that students have funding to pursue a teaching degree, that they will be able to pay back loans or get their degree debt-free or close to debt-free. We have to do that in collaboration and coordination with the colleges and universities and with the LEAs and with MSDE to make this all come together. So I think that's the piece that is often the elephant in the room when we're talking about these initiatives. So I know the campuses are working closely together to make sure, and you see some of the comments, to make sure that they're enticing a diverse set of students, but they're getting students kind of at that point, not necessarily recent high school graduates. So it's a lot of collaboration, and that's where I think our agency needs to prioritize and make sure we're working with all the other stakeholders so it's a unified effort.
Hey, Rachel.
So, yes, Ms.
The question. I don't remember the enough about the intent of this program. Does it address the curriculum, the rigor of the curriculum that students take in teacher preparation programs?
It's really, these grants are actually going to the institutions of the teacher preparation program institutions based on essentially creative approaches to bringing more historically underrepresented students into the teacher prep pathway and meeting the needs, providing supports for those students if needed to support them in.
So it's more diversity of the teaching force than the rigor of the teacher prep programs.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yes, it's very.
But there are other elements of the teacher prep that do address the rigor of the program. Isn't that right?
There absolutely are, and we're going to get to those.
Good. Okay.
Yep. Yep. And I just wanted to follow up on what Emily was saying, and just to make this sort of a kind of a constructive dialogue. I think that was an excellent point about collaboration. If there's anything that and you don't have to answer now, and Emily, you don't have to answer it all right now, but to be thinking about like how to increase collaboration so that if there are ways to make that collaboration more intentional and ongoing. And And particularly with this brand new program, there's an opportunity to, talk with higher ed and collaborate with higher ed in designing the program to sort of meet the needs that everyone's sort of expressing.
Ari came back with some data on Maryland leads. I don't know if Ari, you want to come off camera real quick, because the folks that are watching live aren't privy to everything that's in the chat box. So if you want to just kind of go over some of this data around the grow your own models. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I had to unmute in two different places. Yes, happy to do that. So the Maryland Leads program, as I said in the chat, has attracted participation from 23 of our 24 local school districts, specifically in the Grow Your Own Staff components of the program. So 23 school districts are launching or enhancing Grow Your Own Staff programming starting this year. That's led to a total investment of over $47 million, which includes some matching funds. So a lot of that is money from the federal investment of funds, but also some local money has gone into that total dollar amount. That has the potential to generate more than 300 new teachers, 100 new paraprofessionals, and also to provide support for more than 400 conditionally certified teachers to pass the licensure exams that they need or complete the hurdles that are remaining for them to become fully certified educators in Maryland across the state. And I wanted to also just note that many of those programs focus on hard to staff fields and or on underrepresented demographic groups in the educator profession, which of course we all believe deeply is a high priority in this work. And I see the question about the system not participating. I don't want to lie to you. I think I know the answer, but let me confirm and I'll put it in the chat.
That's great. And let me just say for everyone, for those who are, watching and not participating, we are trying to, share out everything that's going into the chat, but also staff is going to be taking all the information from today's meeting and from the chats and incorporating them into the materials and the follow-up for the next meeting. So hopefully all of that will be, will be shared with everyone.
I guess as we continue on with Objective 2.1 and go to 2.1.5, monitoring the quality and diversity of state teacher candidates and existing teacher workforce. I wonder if probably the person with the position to answer this would be Rachel. If you could let us know kind of where we stand on this, and if there's, I guess, any discussion points, things that we need to talk through and engage with the larger community.
Absolutely. So this is sort of it's a broad task to monitor the quality and diversity of the existing teacher workforce and the incoming teacher candidates. Just to provide a little more reminder for on the timeline, what the different symbols mean. So a star means that the program or the task is has a statutory requirement with a date, a timeline date. And so in this case, if we go to the first subtask, which is MLDS submits an annual progress report, that annual reporting requirement began on July 1st. So MLDS has submitted this first report, which is sort of, it's essentially a baseline report. And then the line indicates that it's required each year. And then the star in, for that subtask, and the line goes out to fiscal 32, which is when the AIB no longer exists. So they wouldn't be reporting to the AIB anymore. The reporting requirement might continue, but it ends in 32 with the AIB. And then there also was a requirement, the next subtask, the LEAs have submitted reports on the diversity of their workforce. This was a one-time requirement in the blueprint that the General Assembly added, and those reports were due July 1st as well. One thing to note on that, the LEAs themselves have actually suggested that this would be an area where it might make sense for them to report annually or regularly on these data, which I think is, absolutely the case. But it's not just the actual data, but it's the analysis of the data, and what they take from that data and what they're going to do with that. That could either be done through a separate reporting requirement or as part of their annual update to their blueprint plan. So that's one thing to think about, is how and when different data and analysis should be provided to the AIB and to the public. And then the next item is an evaluation requirement. The next two tasks related to essentially what the blueprint called for is about 5 years in, a little more than 5 years into the blueprint implementation, sort of an evaluation of whether all the various efforts that are being made to increase diversity among teachers and school leaders, whether it's working. And so that is 2.1.5C, and D is in the official report that the AIB is required to submit to the Governor and General Assembly, any recommendations for changes to state programs or policies, particularly to the statute that the AIB would recommend in order to increase diversity.
All right, thank you so much, Rachel. I guess any final comments before we close out our discussion of objective 2.1 and then move on to 2.2, the increased rigor of teacher preparation programs and licensure requirements? Any other final questions or thoughts, either from board members on the recruiting and maintaining a high quality and diverse teacher workforce, or other folks that are on the line? All right. I guess
Joe, I think there's a really important comment just made in the chat about source of information about really the comment is about teachers who leave, but also about people who don't go into teaching, although they may be interested in teaching. I do know that Dr. Rice at University of Maryland is working on a study of undergraduates, asking them why they weren't going into teaching. And I don't know if that information has been used by folks at MSDE in their marketing plan or not. I don't know if Kelly, if you know that, if whether non-teachers but people who are interested in teaching informed any of the marketing. But that could just be something we put on the table to think about and work in.
I think maybe even before that, since the live stream doesn't have access to the chat, Shimoy, are you able to come on screen and maybe just ask your question to the group? I guess.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, my computer decided to freak out right then and there. Yeah. So the question I'm asking, it really seems that there's some vital information missing from the teachers themselves, and we could get this information from exit interviews or some other method about why it is that they're leaving the workforce in the first place, especially if we're concerned about diversity. It might be something related to working conditions or, structural racism operating in their everyday experiences.
Yeah, so I guess a question to surfacing around what we know about teacher retention and why individuals are leaving, maybe leaving the profession, and if there's things that we can do in order to try to address that. So I don't know if someone wants to chime in about this, or if this is just something to continue to be mindful about and figure out what we can do to get that input from exiting teachers.
And I just wanted to add in that I believe that the LEAs, that is part of one of the things that they talked about as they were working on the diversity report, is to do exit interviews and also focus groups to determine either why, to make sure to find out from existing staff if there are things happening that are, could be improved to attract more diverse teaching staff, and then also to make sure they know why folks are leaving. I think that's a really excellent point. And I would just be very interested in Dr. Rice's research on that, if that's something that we can share with everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing that up, Samoya. We have a question from Shalimar Douglas. So Shalimar, you want to ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I just, one, I want to thank Shamoya for her comment, because I think it's important that we look at some of these things that we're wrestling with through looking at a historical lens. So the people that we're talking about who are not in our classrooms in the numbers that we want, at least that I'm talking about, are Black African-American people. And so I think we definitely have to recall that there was intentional push out of Black and brown educators in our state and in other states as well, in the 80s and 90s. And so I think there has to be some reconciliation around that and some acknowledgement of that. And if people want, data on that, I can certainly provide it. The other piece I'd like to bring up, again, is with regards to the teacher preparation programs, there is an issue of a lack of racial diversity in the staff in teacher preparation programs and experience. And I don't know if it's in this place that we look at that, but I think that has to be examined as well.
Thank you so much for those comments. I guess any reflections either from folks from the teacher prep community, or I don't know if any other comments or reflections from the board on pillar 2.1 before we move on to objective 2.2. Using my teacher wait time.
Should we move on to 2.2?
Yeah, I think we'll go on. So okay. I think 2.2, I guess we'll start with.
Would you like me to review it first?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Rachel. And I'm going to go back and scan the chat, see if there's things that we're missing or new comments to the surface.
Okay.
Go ahead. Thank you.
So 2.2 is to increase the rigor of teacher preparation programs and licensure requirements. And that is the objective of 2.2. There is a lot in 2.2. The first task is the teacher collaborative grants. These were actually created in 2019, and funding has been provided for several years now. I might have misspoken, in 2018. These teacher collaborative grants were created initially to sort of start to bring LEAs, teacher prep programs, and the employee representatives together in partnership to look at how to create models for the pre-service or teacher preparation pathways, in-service programs, meaning induction for new teachers and ongoing professional development, based on the new policies of the blueprint. And so the funding has been provided $2.5 million a year for MSD to make awards to these partnerships of again, at least one LEA, at least one teacher prep program, and at least one employee organization. And essentially to develop, sort of like proof points or models that could be, if successful, could serve as instructive to the rest of the state and help to implement on a larger scale, to scale up these models if they were worthwhile. And so we have had teacher collaborative grants have been awarded for a couple of years now. And some of those grants are still in process. And I believe MSD is getting ready to award another round of grants. And so I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that. I want to put anyone on the spot.
Rachel, yeah, I did want to ask if on that last point, 2.2.1C, the status of kind of the activities funded. Do we have information from MSDE, or is there someone from MSDE now who wants to share what's going on with these grants, or is there a grantee in the audience who wanted to talk a little bit about what they've learned? Because I think that this seems like very important work that could inform the technical advisor or the technical assistance group and helping the various elements of our system to change a bit.
I think that Kelly can give a high-level overview again of where we are with the grants in terms of numbers and process. I will say just in advance, so that she doesn't have to, that because this is a grant process that is in process, there will be some amount of just for process. She won't be able to go into great detail about anything currently in process or under review, as I'm sure you can all understand. But Kelly, do you mind giving just a high level about numbers and timeline?
Absolutely, yes. So we did start awarding this grant. I believe it was 2019, Rachel, and we awarded 3 grants, and they are 3-year grant programs. Those grants went to University of Maryland, partnering with Prince George's County and Montgomery County all together. Bowie State partnering with Howard County Public Schools, and Morgan State University partnering with Baltimore City. And so they are in year 3, I believe, of their grant program. And then we also awarded a grant in fiscal year 22 to Towson University, who is partnering with Baltimore City, I believe. And so that is a new grant. And we actually just awarded another grant. And I don't know if it's public yet, so I'm not going to mention who it was. But you're right, Rachel, we are going to put it out again shortly here for fiscal year 23.
Great, thank you, Kelly. And I see Megan Madigan, sorry, that's probably not your full name, P, who, did you want to share something?
Sure, yeah, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, Megan Madigan Piercy, so the P is definitely in there. We were recipients, as was mentioned, of one of the teacher collaborative grants through MSDE, and that's got a number of aspects to it in terms of the work that we're doing with that grant. And one of the components that is relevant to what we're talking about right now is an expanded internship experience, which we are piloting this fall with 8 interns in Montgomery County and in Prince George's County. And some of the aspects of that expanded intern.
Oops. I think she froze.
I did. I'm sorry. I'm back.
There we go.
I don't
Right, Meg.
I don't know what's going on with my Zoom, but let me just stop my video and see if that helps. So we're piloting an expanded internship with 8 interns in Prince George's and Montgomery County this fall. And part of those expanded experiences include opportunities to shadow other professionals in a much more detailed way in their schools than typically happens. Usually interns will be primarily in their mentor teacher's classroom, and this will give them more exposure to the work of special educators and ESOL specialists and reading specialists and a number of other specialists in the building, so that they have a deeper understanding of how to support a diversity of learners and really an increased attention to ways that they can engage in equity related experiences for students in their buildings. And then another aspect of the expanded internship that we are piloting will be their opportunity to collaborate with other pre-service teachers who are also part of the internship placed in the same building, because they don't usually have that variety of collaborative experiences. So those are among several different things that we're engaged in with the internship. And then there are a lot of other aspects to the work that we're doing with this grant, but those are probably the ones that are the most salient to what we're discussing right now.
Great, thank you so much, Megan, for your comments. I wanted to elevate in the chat from Dr. Laura Henry. Just I think they were having some struggles with partners from Somerset County and UMES because of some conflicting timelines with that and the LEAD grant that made it difficult for them to I think get both applications in, if I understand that correctly. But let me know, Dr. Henry, if I'm not stating that correctly. Great. So it looks like, Rachel, you've done a pretty good job covering some of the elements of, go ahead.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, I would particularly, I think somebody from College Park is on, and they had a grant. So I just wanted to, I'm sorry, I forget the name of the person who just spoke from College Park.
Oh, are you referring
there
to
you are.
Megan,
Yes.
Megan Piercy? Yes.
Hi, yeah.
Yes.
So one thing that the commission did, and the blueprint has reflected, is we tried to look internationally to look at the very best systems and understand what makes them so good, and that's reflected throughout the report. And one of the things we focused on was making teaching a high status profession, like it is in the countries with really high performing systems, and to ensure that people are compensated at the level of others who require a similar level of education. So I just wonder, as you think about grants to improve teacher preparation programs, do you look at what teacher preparation looks like in some of these really high performing systems, and what are the elements of that make their teachers so effective in the classroom? Is that something that is that you do ever look at? That's one question. The other is that I've talked to a lot of new teachers, and what I hear from them is they are totally unprepared for the reality of the present classroom management, how to deal with effectively in managing the classroom so that good learning is taking place. And the impression I've gotten is that there isn't enough attention paid to that in the present teacher preparation programs. I may be wrong, but that's the impression I've gotten from hearing from new teachers. So could you address both of those points?
Sure. So related to your first question about the excellence of programs in other countries,
right?
I think that is certainly something that's important for all of us to be paying attention to, because those systems can inform all of us. I think anytime you're looking at areas that have had strong performance and success, that can be informative. One of the things that we focused on significantly in putting together the redesigned internship experience was looking at the literature broadly across all countries, not necessarily focusing on those specific high performing areas, but looking at the literature, the research regarding what it is that contributes to a high quality internship experience. And one of the things that we found that's supported by the research is the quality of the internship. And that's why we're focusing on some of these expanded experiences to engage in other aspects of an internship that haven't been typical of our programs in the past. And part of that was also doing a pretty detailed self-study of our different programs and looking at what kinds of experiences did the interns have already, and what might help expand their attention and capacity to engage in more equity-focused activities. So that's in response to your first question. With respect to your second question related to classroom management, that is certainly something that we see over and over again, that novice teachers are challenged by. And I wouldn't say that that necessarily has been a specific intentional focus of the research that we drew upon to inform the internship, but it is something that I think we all have to be mindful of as we think about how to support novice and struggling teachers in the classroom. So I appreciate you raising that. I'll also maybe just pitch it briefly to one of my colleagues who I think is on the call, also Joel Miller, and see if Joel, do you have anything you wanted to add to what I have said, since you've been involved a lot in the development of this?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Piercy, and thank you for having us here today. I'm not sure that I would add anything else to your discussion about literature that you mentioned, other than to emphasize that we are looking at this kind of expanded set of experiences, particularly with the interns amongst their peers and relationships with mentor teachers. There was another comment in the chat from Dr. Hunter, who is also working on this project, where the PDS project is also looking at teacher career ladder, looking at professional learning opportunities for current teachers, as well as preparing mentor teachers. So we're trying to kind of bring all of these pieces into alignment as we think about what the interns are doing, in particular, the ways we could do that with this pilot internship program.
I think another thing that hasn't necessarily come up, but that would be, I think, greatly supportive of this kind of work is to think about how to engage in paid internships, especially since we're talking about, earlier we were mentioning, the drastic teacher shortage we've got right now and the need to find ways to attract people to the profession. So that's just a related component that I'll add.
Yeah, thanks so much to both of you for your feedback, and then lots of comments in the chat that I think are related to 2.2.1, but I think really we're starting to drift more into the objective 2.2.2, revising teacher prep programs to meet new requirements. So I think we'll move into that arena, which I think, it's very, very robust and lengthy. If you can look on the, if we can have Emma scroll down a little bit so we can see the full scope of this. I mean, there's many, many elements of this, but I think a lot of area for discussion. So, I guess if we move on to there, any initial questions, comments as it relates to 2.2.2 within this branch of the blueprint?
So, Mr. Manka, would you like me to give a brief?
Yeah, if you want to maybe give us a little overview and kind of where we stand with some of these things and the genesis of where this is coming from.
Sure. So 2.2.2 is the teacher prep provisions under the new blueprint requirements. And then, as Mr. Manko said, a number of tasks below it. The first several deal with what some people call the teacher internship, the teacher residency, the teacher practicum, but they're all different names for the time that teacher candidates spend in schools and in classrooms learning their craft. And so there are some new minimum length requirements that the blueprint requires. The first one deals with the alternative certification programs that have actually, starting this past year, been required to provide 100-day practicum, which is the length that other teacher preparation programs in the state have been required to provide for a number of years. And there are some exceptions to that, but in general, they have to be on 100 days. And so the STAR in fiscal 22 reflects that was a requirement beginning in fiscal 22. The next couple of subtasks relate to undergraduate and alternative programs in the future will be required to offer the equivalent of a full school year to as part of the practicum. And that requirement is effective July 1, 2025, which is fiscal 26. So you'll see, and I know it's a little hard to do with this giant document, but you'll see a star in fiscal 26 there, and also that same requirement or the 100-day requirement applies to graduate programs beginning in fiscal 26. And then there are some other subtasks that relate to the practicum. So partner schools, which are also referred to as professional development schools, or PDS, was referred to by some speakers. The blueprint calls on the teacher prep programs to make sure that they have partner schools that reflect the diversity of schools, public schools in the state and in the county school systems where the school is located, and also to identify mentor teachers, which you see here the term clinical mentor teachers. So this is the phrase that was proposed by, I think it was the Maryland State Education Association offered some comments around confusion about the term mentor teacher. So clinical mentor teachers refers to teachers who are part of the programs in the PDS or partner schools. And that in the future, those mentor teachers should be selected from the career ladder when it's fully implemented, and that they would be responsible for helping to evaluate whether prospective teachers are displaying the competencies that are needed to be a successful teacher. And then below that, starting in 2.2.2b1 are a number of new, or they may not be many teacher prep programs may be already doing this, but these requirements are new in the statute. Requires participants to demonstrate competency in different components, including basic research skills, the differentiation of instruction to students, assessing student learning needs, cultural competency, restorative practices, and effective classroom management, which Dr. Kerwin brought up as one issue that has been raised, that teachers are not prepared for the students in the classrooms of today. And then there are a number of other specified requirements for teacher prep programs in these various subtasks, all the way down to 2.2.2 B4, which calls on teacher prep programs and the school systems to develop a methodology and essentially a feedback loop between the school systems and the teacher prep programs to strengthen both the programs preparing teachers, but also the induction program, which is the first 3 years that teachers are in the classroom, and the ongoing professional development system. So that's a big one. And then the next one, B5, is MSDE providing technical assistance and working with the LEAs and the teacher prep programs to provide a systemic feedback loop, essentially. And then I'll just, in B7, the statute authorizes MHEC and MSD to establish apprenticeship program in teaching, whatever that might look like. And then in 8 and 9, 8 refers to regulations to revise the teacher preparation program requirements. This is something that at least the first round of regulations have been reviewed by the AIB and are waiting. The AIB has made some suggestions and awaiting PSTEB and state board action. And part of what the AIB suggested was that the teacher preparation work group that was part of the blueprint and was supposed to convene and review the current state requirements for teacher preparation programs and essentially look at how the requirements, whether they need to be adjusted, whether they could be adjusted to make room for the longer practicum requirement, and also to talk about how these new requirements can be embedded in the programs within the current 4-year degree program. And so just as an update, the AIB is going to be convening the teacher preparation work group beginning in August to begin to have these discussions and bring back some recommendations to the Pillar 2 working sessions around potential changes to state requirements and ways for programs to integrate the new requirements. I'll stop there.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks so much for the update, Rachel, and also for the important work of convening the work group, because I think that's going to be really important to get feedback from multiple stakeholders. We have some questions in the chat just around cultural competency. Maybe this is for some of our higher education partners. How is cultural competency being addressed and achieved in the university programs? Is it a module? Is it a course? Is it integrated across all courses? How are you defining cultural competency? Any of our partners from higher education that are able to chime in on how this exists within your institution?
Can you hear? Is the problem, Joe?
What's that? Yeah,
So
no,
there's a question?
it was a question that was, sent out to some of our higher education partners. But yeah, if there's nobody who is interested in that point, at this point,
Joe?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the cultural competency thing, because on the commission, that was a huge discussion. And the importance of having that become a part of the teacher preparation programs in a very serious and systematic way. So it's a very, very important issue, and I wish there was someone from higher ed who would comment on it. But it's something we need to make as we upgrade and improve our teacher preparation programs. This is an area that we will want to see some very significant action.
And I think we have, Dean Boyce Williams, do you have a comment or something to share with us?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I was just going to say that we, in our MAT Maryland Accelerates program, cultural competency responsive teaching is a micro-credential. It's a required badge, and when we all of our courses, and we also make it available to all of our mentor teachers and coaches that are working with our students in the Maryland Accelerates program, and that's for our entire MAT program at both the elementary and the secondary. So it is very much a part, culturally responsive teaching is very much a part of our program. And as I said, when candidates graduate, they are awarded and earn that micro-credential and badge as a part of the program at Frostburg.
Great. Thank you, Dean Boyce Williams. And then Dr. Jeter?
Yes.
Sorry, from Bowie State.
Yes, I wanted to raise my hand and say that at Bowie State University, culturally responsive teaching and pedagogy is integrated throughout all of our courses, and there's an expectation that teachers will be able to display their skills in that area. That is a piece of what is quintessential to the training model that we have at Bowie. And so that is, when I saw that, I was good to see that it's going to be integrated across programs, but that is something that's always been very important to the students that we turn out to make sure they could be culturally competent in their teaching.
Great. Thank you so much, Dean Jeter. I see from Megan Madigan at University of Maryland, three-course diversity series for their master's and certification candidates. And then I see a hand raised from Dr. Lori Henry. I don't know if you wanted to share with the group what you're doing around culturally responsive teaching, or any other questions or comments as it relates to objective 2.2.2.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I think that all of our educator preparation programs across the state do address culturally responsive instruction. At Salisbury University, we kind of recoined the term to culturally intentional instruction. So really looking specifically at the students that are in classrooms that we serve and making sure that we're intentional about our cultural instruction for those students, so they feel like they have a safe place in order to learn. And I just want to echo the comment that I put in the chat, that I think it's really important for us as a state to inventory the programs that we currently have and what our programs are doing in our partnerships with our LEAs, which are extremely strong in the state of Maryland. And really thinking about, how do we establish a P20 continuum for education and not having these silos where we're focused on P12 education and post-secondary education separate from each other, but really how do we infuse that collaboration on that P20 spectrum? Thank you so much, Dr. Henry.
I guess as we go back and look at this, this massive object 2.2.2, I guess any questions or comments as it relates to the first few elements around the practicums, whether we call it practicum or the internship or the residency, comments or questions, things that people wanted to elevate.
Joe, if I could, one of the comments, Janine Backey, hopefully I said your name right, Janine, from Montgomery County Public Schools, has put in the chat, making the link to the early childhood pillar 1 and the need for our early childhood educators to also be well prepared in culturally responsive teaching. And I just wanted to raise that up, and also so early childhood educators do go through, are required to be certified and that is part of moving forward as part of the blueprint. That certification requirement, the new requirements that are all listed here would also apply to early childhood educators.
Thank you. I had just mentioned that because the issue of disproportionality is something that we look at in terms of also the providing resources to support students. And so the disproportionality that's pre-K, kindergarten, and the early grades, I think the cultural competency and integrating that has got to be able to address that if we look at the national research and our research in Maryland. So I just wanted to point that out when we're talking about integrating this training across the coursework. I think it's early childhood, it's particularly important, not that it isn't for the other grades, but that's kind of really where the disproportionality begins. Thank you.
And you've also made a really good connection to Pillar 1, but also to not just new teachers that we're going to be training, but the need for the same training for existing teachers. Mr. Manko, Emily Dow from MHEC would like to bring up something about apprenticeships, if we want to talk about those now.
For sure. And I guess I'm hoping this is about teacher apprenticeships, because we're talking about Pillar 3, yes, I think in 2 weeks, but
yes.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
I'm assuming.
Yes, I am sorry. Did I misread? I thought it was in the list about providing, 2.2B7.
Yep.
MSDE and MHEC may authorize traditional and alternative teacher preparation programs to establish an apprenticeship program. So I just want to clarify and make sure, certainly kind of everybody's role and responsibility. If and when we move ahead with that conversation, labor is going to be an important partner in all of that. I can speak for MHEC. We don't approve apprenticeship programs in the traditional federally approved Maryland state approved apprenticeship programs with a capital A, but we certainly can provide assistance in that. The U.S. Department of Ed recently had a webinar that I think I shared with many of the people on this call around Tennessee implementing an apprenticeship program around teacher preparation. I also think Virginia has an apprenticeship program for early childhood education. So there are models to consider. But I want to be clear that MHEC doesn't really play a role in terms of approving apprenticeship programs, and we would really want to engage with labor because, and I'm sure you all know this, apprenticeship with a capital A has a primary tenet of the individual is employed from day one. And so engaging with an employer, likely an LEA, is going to be essential to really move that forward, if that is a model to move ahead on. So I think some moving pieces there to be thoughtful and cognizant of. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Emily, that's an excellent point. And I will also say, in addition, the Department of Labor and also the new CTE committee that is specifically going to be working, which is sort of housed under the Governor's Workforce Development Board, which is under the Department of Labor, which is going to be working on new CTE pathways and including apprenticeships. So they would also be part of that.
And Jeff Marr just put in the comment box, providing credit for experiential learning in schools would be a great step, especially if that credit was aligned to teacher ed requirements.
Okay, if we are to look at this section, before we get to the next one, the same question applies that I asked earlier. Where we are with all of the things that we've identified so far, what does MSDE must do now in terms of anything required of them? And I think it would be what other additional programs or new programs that have been made successful in other places. And we have a comprehensive look to see whether or not there's something needs to be incorporated here by MSDE. But more importantly, though, the area here needs to move a little bit faster than some of the others, I think, because this is going to take a lot of time. You're talking about preparation programs, changing the curriculums, you're talking about adding additional requirements, all the recruitment. You look at all of those things, there are long-term implications. All right, yeah.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, I was just going to say, yeah, that's a really excellent point, particularly if you look, it's hard to see in the timeline sort of scrolled in, but a lot of the timelines for these elements right now are not, they're white, meaning the statute doesn't specifically say when they need to happen by. And so essentially the AIB, the plan needs to identify expectations for when these various elements would be expected to be implemented.
Okay.
And also I would add, I think one of the really critically important reasons why convening this work group around teacher prep, I think will be really helpful, because they'll help to provide some input on what rigorous yet manageable timelines could look like as we start kind of establishing what the expectations are around this.
Yeah, and keep in mind also that many of these programs are already in existence. They were probably there, I'm almost certain, prior to the COVID outbreak. And we noticed then that they did not have as meaningful an impact as they should otherwise. We've gotten beyond that, and the problem has gotten greater, so we have to think more creatively and adjust to the realities we face today, because much of this is already in motion, and our numbers continue to go down, and recruitment continues to be a problem.
I think before we move into our next objective, 2.3, the implementation of comprehensive in-service educator training, I'm going to, first off, thank you everybody for all their engagement with this. I mean, this was very challenging to, envision a Zoom meeting with 100 participants. And, I think everybody has been, I hope that you are able to, elevate your questions in the chat, and and we really value your input in all of this. So it's just been really great hearing everybody's thoughts and their collaboration and their in their focus around this. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel as we go into objective 2.3 to kind of give us just an overview of some of the thinking around the in-service educator training, and then we can engage into some discussion at that point. Oh, you're muted, Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. I just will very briefly point out that there are a couple of other tasks under 2.2 related to in 2.2.3, the new portfolio-based assessment requirement for graduation and for initial licensure, and also the requirement for in 2.2.4 for teachers to pass exams in reading instruction and grade level content. And again, I would just point out that in the timeline, there is for 2.2.3 related to the portfolio-based assessment, there is a date specified in the statute, which is July 1, 2025. The other elements do not specifically have dates in the statute. And so that is why it is white there. So that again are things that need to be decided to be included in the plan. And then moving on to 2.3, this is the objective to implement comprehensive in-service educator training. And so this is once teachers have graduated, have been certified, and they're now in the schools, what that training and professional development looks like. And the first item, which is related to annual training on student behavioral health needs. And this actually applies not just to teachers, but any school personnel who have regular contact with students. That is a requirement that was actually begun under the in 2018. So I think 2019 was the first year for that. And LEAs have been required to provide this training to their personnel. We don't at the present have specific information on how that's happening, other than that they are required to do it every year. The next item is related to training on the blueprint, school leadership training on the blueprint. This is 2.3.2. This is written into the statute in terms of something that MSD in collaboration with AIB needs to do. The actual, there are no specific date requirements in the statute. So instead of a star, you see a yellow dot beginning in fiscal 23, which is the estimated time that at least developing the training program would begin in fiscal 23. As outlined in the statute, it's a pretty intensive training program that would relate to the blueprint and really over a period of time of at least 12 months. And it's sort of a train the trainer model where once the first cohort are trained, then they would sort of train others in their, be it at the state level, the local level. And there is funding provided in the budget for this training to be provided beginning in fiscal 23. And then in 2.3.3, this is the induction program, a comprehensive induction program that would be developed and required for all new teachers. Presently, it is required for there is a form of an induction program that is required for new teachers, but it is not as rigorous as what the blueprint calls for. And MSDE will be designing the guidelines for that training, and it's required to go into effect essentially when the new teacher preparation and certification requirements are required, July 1, 2025. It could be done sooner, potentially. I think that's one thing maybe to think about with the timeline. And I'll stop there.
So I think in my eagerness to get on to 2.3, I moved a little bit too fast because there are some comments still in 2.2. So I guess one question is from Christy Kahlo from Hood College. So her question is in 2.2.4, is that referring to the teaching reading? Is that the elementary ed exam, or is that a different exam?
So it could be that exam, or it could be a different exam, depending on what MSDE and the state board would. I mean, it would be subject to regulation. So the MSDE and the state board and the Professional Standards Teacher Education Board, which is PSTEB, are jointly responsible for setting those requirements and regulations, and that would also be subject to the review and comment of the AIB.
And then I think the other thing that got surfaced is Ari said that she might be able to give some updates on the regulations around, I presume around teacher prep, but I don't know if Ari, if you're available to give us an update on where the regulations stand.
I am here, although really I'm not very helpful too. I was actually going to again turn it over to Kelly, so I'm not very useful except for this. Hey, Kelly, do you mind giving us an update?
Hey, Kelly.
Just on the timeline, Kelly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you just cut out a second, but I think you said timeline, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So where with the regulations, so where we are right now is, and thank you to the AIB for your feedback that you had mentioned before. We do have it. The Professional Standards Board has reviewed it. We've yet to go to the state board, but of course they will review it as well. So at this point, we are making substantive changes to the drafted regulations, which was something we knew would happen all along. We've got a tremendous amount of public comment that we looked at for the last several months. PSTEB has been working on amending those regulations month by month. And at this point, we're still in that process of making those amendments to the drafted regulations. And now we have the AIB feedback as well. So it is very much still in process. Once we finalize them and take them to the state board, we will have to go through the process again of publishing them in the Maryland Register, getting that public comment, and then hopefully this time around we can ask for adoption.
And any idea on when you think it will make it to the state board?
I don't want to jinx it. Well, and Kelly, let me just also, something that Kelly said, that just so everyone's clear on what she was saying. So because the substantive changes are being made, as it sounds like, the regulations will have to go through the entire process again. And so the timing of when it does go back to the state board is important, but just so everyone's clear, that's the process is going to have to start all over again. So it will take some time to finalize those.
Got it.
And if it's right.
Oh, go ahead, Ari. Sorry.
I apologize. I didn't mean to step on you. I was just going to also add that as the conversation unfolded, I know there were some comments in the chat about the importance of this work and about the ways that MSC is intersecting with the educator prep programs, and we certainly take that to heart and seriously. And I just wanted to say out loud that the superintendent is, as many of you know, really focused on this particular bucket of work, is really committed to being a partner in pushing this work forward. And in fact, it's one of the things that we are doing, as Kelly well knows, is working on developing a new position at MSDE that would be specifically focused on supporting ed prep programs, improving and consolidating and streamlining our support, our technical assistance, as well as our approval process and our renewal process. So just wanted to share that bit of update as well.
Thanks so much. All right, so I guess at this point, hopefully we can close out our discussion, at least for the time being, on 2.2 and head down to 2.3 that Rachel so graciously just took us through. So I guess open to questions or discussion as it relates to 2.3, the implementation of comprehensive in-service educator training. I mean, I know for me, one of the really critical elements of this is just the, you know, the blueprint training and information that gets down to the school level. I mean, I think ultimately for the blueprint to be fully actualized, it means that, you know, folks that are within school buildings need to understand deeply the rationale of you know, how the legislation came to be, why you know, these practices were surfaced as, you know, best in class and, you know, world-class practices, and you know, try to get everybody across the state to own this and want this to be successful. So I think those are, for me, really, really important elements of this component of the blueprint.
So I saw a comment in the chat from Shamoya Gardner from Strong Schools, Maryland.
Yeah.
And Shamoya, if you're available, I think you're talking about induction programs and following up training with coaching.
Yes, thanks, Rachel. And I'm also specifically speaking to that training provided in 2.3.1 on student behavioral health. Yeah, so training generally requires coaching, like follow-up, in order for it to stick. And it does seem to me that some kind of method of evaluation, it doesn't have to be punitive in any way, it can be reflective, is necessary, just so that we understand what the outcomes of this training are, whether it is really effective, and frankly, whether it's what teachers and educators feel they need.
Great point, thank you. Especially in our, I was going to say post-COVID, but we're not in post-COVID yet, in our COVID environment.
How are we on our time level?
We have about 20 minutes left for pillar 2.
Okay.
Rachel?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. I noticed that AIB is supposed to provide training for the state superintendent, local superintendents, actually even the State Board of Education in partnership with MSDE. I can't see the timeline, but when is that supposed to happen?
So
Thank you.
Yes. So we put the yellow dot in fiscal 23 to indicate, while it's not, there's no specific date in the law for when that training should happen. I think the goal would be for it to, you know, happen.
Really should be early on.
And exactly. Yeah. So this is one of many things on MSDE and AIB's to-do list.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm assuming that will be done, it says in collaboration, in partnership between the two. That's the intent.
Yes, that's the intent. Yes.
So, I mean, you and your staff would be doing that, right?
I think so what the commission, this was a recommendation of the Kerwin Commission, and it really is intended to be a very intensive training program. And I think we would probably look to hire a consulting firm or organization to be able to deliver that training.
Yeah. I mean, it's time is moving on, and we got a late start through no fault of ours. So it does seem to me that this training is important to do early on, as early as it can be done, because people need to know about the blueprint, because while that's going on, things will be getting implemented. And so I just think that's something we need to pay close attention to.
Absolutely. Part of, as the chair put it, building the plane while we fly it. Absolutely. Do we want to move on to 2.4? Okay.
Yeah. So Rachel, if you want to take us to 2.4 and then just give us a little overview around the career ladders. I mean, we also acknowledge that at this point we have about 20 minutes left. We knew that Pillar 2 was very gargantuan, and it's probably going to need potentially 2 sessions. I've been really excited about the progress we've made so far. So thank you everybody for hanging in there. And yeah, Rachel, if you could maybe just get us started on 2.4, and we'll see where we go.
Sure. So I think just since we won't necessarily make our way all the way through, I'll just sort of go one by one.
Yep.
We can have a little discussion and see how far we get. So 2.4.1 relates to a new program within MSDE and each of the LEAs to support national board certification for teachers, both to pursue initial certification and then the maintenance of their national board certification, and particularly to encourage and support teachers from historically underrepresented populations. This is a brand new program that MSDE will be implementing and the LEAs will be implementing beginning, again, there's no specified date in the law for when it would need to begin. So we've put a yellow dot in fiscal 23, and that it would, and one of the first steps in the program is to, for MSDE to hire or select a national board coordinator to oversee the program, and then for each of the LEAs to select national board coordinators for their systems, or they can also choose to join together and have a regional coordinator. And on this point, I did want to, I don't know if any of the teacher prep program folks might want to speak to this, or MSDE or LEAs, but I did notice, I know in some of the comments in the chat from some of the education deans, that building they are working to build into their programs support for teachers to pursue and earn national board certification as well. So I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that. Dr. Richmond?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Richmond.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm Layla Richmond from Towson University, and I will just share that as part of our Maryland Teacher Collaborative Grant with Howard County Public Schools, we have developed a series of courses to support teachers moving through the NBC process, and have coupled that with the career ladder work to say that they will be taught by nationally board certified teachers in the district. So we're building kind of a sustainable model by which national board teachers in the district will be able to support upcoming teachers in pursuing that certification. We're also working to align the elements of EdTPA, which all of our students do, with National Board down the road so that both coaches, mentors, and students and teachers see the connection and can carry that pathway through. So that's some of the work in brief that we're doing with that at Towson.
Great, thanks so much for those comments and for your forward thinking around this. Dr. Henry, you want to talk a little bit about what you all are doing as it relates
Absolutely.
to this?
So similar to Towson, we are looking at how we can help our teacher candidates understand the process for the EdTPA is really a similar process to National Board certification and the benefits for them in the future as classroom teachers to go through that process. We're also looking at redesigning our master's program in curriculum and instruction. So the core components of that master's degree will be National Board certification. So really looking at that as kind of the initial courses that students would take for our master's degree, get their National Board certification, and then be able to continue on to get their master's degree afterwards.
Fantastic, thank you so much.
And I also see in the chat that Hood College is working with Frederick County Schools to support teachers who are pursuing National Board certification.
Right. And it's positive that it looks like there's a lot of connections between the EdTPA and, you know, what they can be translated into National Board, the National Board process. You know, I would also say, and this is, I'm probably not telling people anything that people don't know on this call, but you know, the National Board process in itself is a little esoteric, and I think when I went through it myself, just like fumbling around a lot, and you know, when I became the principal and helped to guide some of my teachers through, I think it was so helpful to have a Sherpa take them through that had gone through the process already. So, yeah, and I know that we're still building the catalog of National Board certified teachers throughout the state, but it's really critical, I think, at least initially, to try to find some folks that have gone through the process that can walk people through, you know, and they don't have to necessarily be the kind of professors or the primary guides, but like at least someone who can help look things over and share some challenges and expertise and going through the process themselves. I see Lisa from Stevenson also talking about how they're embedding the National Board work more robustly within their MED program. So, any comments or thoughts on what we've covered so far in 2.4, or if not, then we'll maybe give some time, and then Rachel can take us through the next branch of this.
Sure. I just see a couple of comments. So I know that MSEA, Maryland State Educators Association, they do have a program, I think it's called Jumpstart. I'm sure they'll correct me if I'm wrong, that is supporting teachers going through a national board. They've had this for, I think, about a decade. And there's also a comment in the chat about disparities in outcomes around national board certification. And I think that's something that certainly the commission was aware of those concerns. The legislature was aware. That's actually one of the reasons why this National Board Support Program was created, to really try to ensure that everyone has an equal shot at pursuing and achieving national board certification. I think it's something that needs to be followed and monitored, and figure out if there's something else that needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think also just being very aggressive around the support structures that we have in place for teachers of color that are interested in pursuing national board certification, especially considering that this does become like a gateway to elevation in the career ladder. So it does need to be something where we need to be very proactive, especially if we want to elevate people of color, who are highly qualified into leadership positions and into coaching positions within the system. Just being very aggressive about how we can support them. There's a great question that has been elevated by Dan Shea, and I guess this one probably I'll throw over to either Rachel or Britt that might have some insights for us. The question is, will there be any discussion about the requirement of future administrators needing national board certification or a waiver? When can this be discussed for those of us with ed leader programs?
So what I think what Dan is referring to is the in the blueprint, there is a requirement beginning in 2029. So it's a little ways out, that principals would need to be national board certified. And the commission recommended this because the looking at best practices, that the principal needs to be the instructional leader of the school and to be very well versed in what the best instructional practices are. And the best way to do that is through ultimately national board certification. There is a waiver process or a waiver authorization in the law, and MSDE is charged with developing the waiver guidelines. And so in the timeline, it actually is somewhere. It's in 2.4.5, actually, if, there we go, yeah. So that's the new requirement. And the STAR is out there in fiscal 30, because that's when the requirement takes place. And then the other two tasks that MSDE and actually PSTEB again will be developing the waiver process and the criteria for what principals need to meet. We are blank because I think obviously they would do that prior to July 1, 2029, but exactly when we would want that to happen is something to still be determined.
Rachel, are you also able to take us through 2.4.2a and help us understand a little bit about the implementation of the or the development of the career ladder, but how this relates with state requirement, like what is left, what is determined by state requirement, and then what is left to collective bargaining?
Sure. So 2.4.2 under that task, LEAs have to develop this new career ladder by July 1, 2024, which is fiscal 25. So the STAR is in fiscal 25. The statute specifies a number of elements of the career ladder that are required. And we did not include those here because it just would have been a very, very long list that would fall under 2.4.2a. But it's a good example of where this timeline can be further built out to drill down in some areas where there are sub-tasks, and particularly if they have a different timeline. And so we will be putting together a list of all of the requirements that the statute has for the career letter. And it really, what the commission's recommendation and what the law includes that is specified are sort of the guardrails around like sort of what every career ladder in every school system has to include. Beyond that, the career ladder is subject to collective bargaining. So the statutory requirements cannot be changed through collective bargaining, but beyond what is specified in the law, other elements of the career ladder can be specified in their individual LEA career ladders based on collective bargaining. And those career ladders will be subject to ultimately the review and approval of MSDE and then AIB, that the career ladders meet the requirements of the law before they go into effect. And just for the rest of 2.4.2 there, the LEAs are authorized to convene local career ladder development boards to help them work on the career ladder. Essentially, many of them have begun some of the introductory work over the last year or so, and it's going to become much more intense for the next year and a half, I would say, as provisions of the career ladder really need to be identified well prior to July 1, 24, so that the provisions can actually take effect beginning in fiscal 25. Although it is possible that it could take effect sooner if an LEA is ready to submit its career ladder for approval. So 2.4.2C is the approval process there. And then in 2.4.2D, there is a specific provision in the law that the LEAs prioritize teachers who have experience in schools that reflect the diversity of the state, both in racial and ethnic terms, and schools that have high concentrations of poverty. Prioritize teachers in those schools to move up the career ladder first. So the career ladder, it has the multiple tiers of, classroom teacher, master teacher, lead teacher, and not master teacher anymore, distinguished. And as teachers are selected to move up the ladder, one of the commission and the blueprints goals is that we want national board teachers to be in the schools that need them the most. And so that is where that priority comes from for those teachers and those schools.
And then, Rachel, I was hoping you could comment on this excellent point that Sandy Jacobs made. The timeline for submission to MSDE for recommendation and to AIB for approval will be important for LEAs to know, given the complexity and the time for collective bargaining.
Excellent point. So we need to come up with a timeline for when they need to be submitted in order to go through that process. We will put that on the to-do list.
And then similarly, more things to kind of put on the to-do list, but Dan Shea elevated, just getting information to the principals around this question of the national board certification requirements, because right now they're in the process of recruiting future leaders for Admin 1 and Admin 2 licenses that will eventually end up in their leadership pool. So, just trying to let people know far in advance so they're not blindsided later on with requirements that they weren't aware of.
Yeah, and if I can just, I think, be careful here. I think something we need to talk about is whether, I think that Dan is referring specifically to national board for principals as opposed to the teacher requirements. So there might need to be some clarification there. We can do that offline.
Got it. All right, so I guess we're coming towards the tail end of our time for Pillar 2. I know we, it was our hope that we would get to at least 2.4, and we have been successful with that. But we're going to have to schedule another time to kind of wrap up the second pillar. But I think we've done some really good work today. I want to appreciate and thank everybody on the call for their participation, for their great questions, for all of our presenters and people who chimed in with great things that they're doing, questions that they had, facts and information, all our partners from the various LEAs, MSDE, MHEC, the schools of education, just really appreciative of everybody for their participation in what is, going into this, we didn't know how this was going to go, but it, but I think it was for our first time through, it was very promising. So I'm going to throw it over to the big boss. So over to you, Mr. Leggett. And
okay. Thanks, Joe, for your leadership on today's session pillar, and thank Rachel and the entire staff there. We have, I think at the time we're going to take a quick break, and I think we'll do about 15 minutes, Rachel, and come back and regroup for the next pillar.
Yes, real quick before we do that, just for anyone who may not be staying on for the Pillar 5 discussion, we have developed a blueprint, a feedback form, not for feedback per se, but for you to actually, if there are any questions or implementation considerations that you want to make sure we capture or you didn't think of during the meeting, please go ahead and submit that. You can submit as many as you want. And if somebody from the AIB staff could drop that link into the chat, that would be great. And then we will be having the next working session on Pillar 2 will be Thursday, August 4th at 1 o'clock. And we will be starting essentially where we left off and go from there. So also for those things that we didn't get to today, you're welcome to use the form to submit questions and considerations that you want to sort of make sure to bring our attention to for August 4th.
Okay, we'll get back at 3:45.
If everyone could just mute and turn your camera off for the break. Thank you.
And people around him were planning for. And so that was sort of the barrier by which we decided to write.
Do we have Rachel back?
We do.
All right.
Mr. Chair, are you ready to begin?
I think so. Thank you. Everybody should be back at this point in time. We're ready to start. The next pillar will be facilitated by Dr. Laura Stapleton. But before we do so, we need to go back just to remind ourselves about where we are. This is a live meeting, live stream. We want as much participation as possible. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. And we need to follow a few guidelines. I think we also have one additional board members to join us as well. Dr. Doss, thank you for arriving. We love to have you participate as well. Let's look at some of the protocols. I want to just remind us of those, Rachel.
Sure. So for everyone who's joined on the Zoom, many of you were here for Pillar 2, but we do have some new folks for Pillar 5. The way we're running this meeting is through using the chat function. If you would put any questions or comments, concerns that you'd like to share, please put those in the chat box, and then either Dr. Stapleton or myself may call on you to explain your question or your comment further. And we really appreciate all the participation from the first part of the session, and hopefully we will have more of the same for the rest of this meeting. And just as a reminder, we will be taking notes. So even if you put something in the chat box and it doesn't get raised, we're definitely keeping track of all that information, and we'll be incorporating it into the documents.
Okay. Let's get started with the overview quickly.
Yep. Emma, if you want to quickly run through Pillar 5.
Yes, thank you. So as I mentioned before, we are focusing on Pillar 2 in the first session, and then Pillar 5 now. So Pillar 5 focuses on governance and accountability, and the objectives that fall under Pillar 5 include establishing the Accountability and Implementation Board to oversee and monitor state and local agencies' progress in implementing blueprint policies. In addition, developing state and local blueprint implementation plans, creating expert review teams to visit schools and make recommendations for improving student achievement, and requiring school systems to demonstrate that at least 75% of per student formula funding follows students to their schools. So we are going to kick it back over to Rachel and Laura, and they'll be taking us through the subtasks of Pillar 5.
Great, thank you, Emma. So as Emma brings up the Pillar 5 graphic, just as a reminder, this is the graphic that we shared in the June meeting at a higher level. And so what we've done is we've taken the graphic from June that focused on the high level objectives and tasks and started to drill down into the subtasks. And so as a refresher on the terminology, so 5.1 under Pillar 5 is the various implementation plans that are required for the blueprint, and 5.1.1 is a task, and that task is that the AIB creates the comprehensive implementation plan for the blueprint, subject to periodic updates. And then below that are new subtasks that we have added to the document that provide more detail on implementation of the comprehensive implementation plan. And to the right is the timeline for this task and these subtasks. And so you can see a star in the fiscal 23 box, which is the statutory requirement of December 1, 2022 for when the comprehensive plan must be created by the AIB. And then the line indicates that the plan will be potentially updated annually throughout the implementation period, with the final date of fiscal 32, which is when the AIB sunsets in the statute. And then just below 5.1.1 in A through E is the process that the AIB is using to develop the comprehensive plan, which we're now in the part A part of the process, which is started in the spring, which is holding these sessions throughout the rest of the summer to develop the content of the comprehensive implementation plan. And then the schedule the AIB is following is by mid-October, there will be a draft comprehensive plan that will be available to the public. There will be a public hearing specifically to collect feedback and comments on the draft in November. And then the AIB will approve the comprehensive plan, at least the initial plan, by this December. And then the statute specifies that if any changes to the plan are needed in future years, that the AIB will adopt those changes by August 1st of each year. And so I will stop there, Dr. Stapleton, and we can see if we have any questions or comments.
Sure. Actually, before we delve into 1.1, I just wanted to mention one of the other goals of this pillar was to create the AIB. And so I do want to give us some credit for that the AIB does exist. We have, I think, a functioning group of 7 great folks. And we have hired an executive director, Rachel Heiss, and she has done a stellar job of starting to staff up the AIB. and has done that on a shoestring of the budget that we were given initially. So I do think some congratulations are in order for making it all start. So anyway, so
that's a great point. We should add that to the timeline.
Check mark. All right, so the comprehensive implementation plan. Do folks have questions or comments about this? This is going to drive pretty much everything else as we go forward. I'm seeing no questions.
I do see a comment from our good friend and former Kerwin Commissioner Buzzy Heddleman, asking about the design and specific framework of the plan. Is it public? And what is the role of consultants or MSDE in drafting it? So I can take a first stab at that if you'd like. Excellent question. Right now, the graphic that you see before you is the plan. And so what we're working on, thinking through really the content of the plan and what it needs to include, and which includes what we've already got here, built out further with timelines all filled in for every task and subtask, making sure who is implementing every task and subtask is specified. Whatever indicators or metrics are going to be used to look at whether it's being implemented properly, whether it's being successful. And so we're going to use this format to try to fill in all of those blanks. Ultimately, there will be a formal document that we're still kind of thinking through what that's going to look like. But it will all, everything will be public as soon as it's available, essentially. And as I said, there will be a draft plan in October, and then a final plan in December. And the draft plan will be available, published publicly on the website, which we do hope to have up and running, available to the public very soon. And MSDE's specific role is in the approval criteria, and we're gonna get to that in a minute if we want to. I don't know if there are any other questions or comments.
Rachel, I'd just say the whole process is public, not just the documents once they're done, but as we're doing today, we're inviting people in as we work on filling in the blanks for the comprehensive plan.
And Rachel, as you shared both before this presentation and at the Pillar 2 presentation, is that there is a feedback form. And and it's so nice that we have labeled each of the tasks and subtasks with specific numeric and alpha numbering. So you can indicate any sort of comments about each of those tasks and subtasks that we're considering. Joe?
Yeah, I guess my question would be, if you are an entity that's eventually going to have to submit a draft or a local plan to the AIB, what would you if you were sitting in that position, what would you be doing currently in order to kind of be proactive and be thinking about it? Like, would you wait until the entire comprehensive plan is finalized before you start engaging in discussions at the kind of local level, or would you look at maybe the document in front of us now and start looking at those particular elements and start discussing, planning with your teams internally gaining stakeholder feedback? Like what would a kind of diligent, proactive LEA or agency that is, you know, responsible for submitting something come, you know, March, what should they be engaging in now in order to stay up to date and ahead on things?
That's a great question, Joe, and I welcome any of the AIB members to answer this question. My initial answer would be, we've used this phrase a lot of times already. We're building the plane while flying it. So we're up in the plane, and as you look at these, what we're talking about right now, you need to let us know now if the plane is going to go down. So so express any suggestions you have now or concerns about the ability to implement some things. And as our fearless chairman said earlier, you know, don't question what we're supposed to be doing in the law. We're going to still try to do that. But to get to that end, what are the challenges that we're going to face with what is already being presented? So I would say LEAs should now be looking at these documents. So you can just see this document is just going to grow. The subtasks are going to be clarified. They'll be explained. There may be additional subtasks that get added. So just provide feedback and start talking about each of these things now, I think. But I welcome other folks' input on that answer.
I would just say I definitely wouldn't wait, and I don't think that the LEAs are. I mean, I know, I think we've talked about, they all have blueprint coordinators. They're required to have that. That's probably on here somewhere, but, and they all do have their blueprint coordinators. They have been working on implementing portions of the blueprint already. And so I think that what's going to be very helpful is, as we get a little further down the road here, as we start to, and maybe this sort of starts to move into 5.1.2 and 5.1.3, the AIB will need to develop minimum guidelines for the plans, and this includes sort of part of the reason for this provision was to not have the plans become like the Thornton master plans, which became very, very voluminous and sort of a little more compliance focused. And so to try to keep the minimum guidelines are designed to sort of keep the plans at a reasonable, concise length and format. And then, of course, whatever minimum content requirements the plans are going to need to have. And then MSDE will be developing criteria under the statute. MSDE develops the criteria to review those school system plans for approval or disapproval. And then MSDE submits their proposed criteria to the AIB, and the AIB ultimately has to approve the criteria that MSDE is going to use when they do their review of the LEA plans. So it's a little confusing, I know, but so that is due September 1st. And so at least MSDE's proposal for what that criteria look like will be available in September. And then we'll see what the timeline is for the AIB approval, but certainly I think once those criteria are clear, that is going to go a long way to helping the LEAs start to work on their blueprint plans. And I will also say that the AIB and MSDE in 5.1.3D is going to be providing training and technical assistance to the school systems and also to other state entities while they're developing their blueprint plans. And one of the things that would be very helpful in receiving feedback and input is in what areas that technical assistance would be the most helpful.
Hey, can I ask a question? Laura, can I ask a question?
I was just going to ask to go back up and,
Sure.
and show 5.1.2
Okay.
on the
All right.
screen.
There you go.
Great, thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the criteria. Is it our criteria or it's the criteria? Are we approving their criteria? Are we doing that independently?
So there are two different sets of criteria. So 5.1.2, that task, it relates to the approval and disapproval of plans that are submitted by state agencies and entities. So that would be MSDE, MHEC, Teacher Prep Program, CTE Committee, and others. And for those state plans, the AIB itself will determine what the criteria you're going to use to approve or disapprove of plans.
No. Are we independently adopting, creating the criteria ourselves, or are we approving their, giving approval to
For
their?
the state, the AIB is independently
Okay.
adopting it. For the LEA plans, MSDE develops, we'll call it a first draft. They develop the what they want to propose as the criteria, and then we will work with AIB and MSDE to, maybe it's perfect when they submit it, but so that the criteria that MSDE is going to use are exactly what AIB agrees with. But then the AIB also, the AIB will then receive a recommendation from MSDE about approval or disapproval of a plan. They also have the independent authority to use their own judgment in terms of whether you approve or disapprove a plan. So MSDE will make a recommendation, but the AIB does have the independent authority to make a different decision than what is recommended.
Okay. We got too many moving parts here.
It's a lot. I know. We tried to separate it between, because it's a different process for the state plans and the LEA plans. So we put the state plans are in 5.1.2 and the LEA plans are in 5.1.3.
Okay. Thank you.
And we have a couple of questions in the chat. Shamoya asked, would the AIB host a public engagement session as a part of the MSDE metric review?
So Shamoya, if you're referring to the approval criteria, those will be the MSDE proposal will be public. The AIB will discuss them in public, and I think your question goes to the timing, perhaps, of when the AIB approves them, and whether there is essentially a session like something like this to discuss the approval criteria. That is something we can certainly consider.
She says, thank you, Rachel. If as other questions germinate here about these two sections, 5.1.2 and 5.1.3, there was another question earlier about the creation of the AIB. And Rachel, could you, in a couple sentences, indicate what staff positions have already been filled and how many staff positions or the types of staff positions that are going to be filled?
Oh, sure. So we are going to be recruiting later this month for a number of positions related to education program and policy analysts in the various policy pillars and policy areas of the blueprint. So early childhood, college and career readiness, teacher preparation and teacher training, community schools, and also research and data analysts that can really dig into the numbers and dig into the evidence. We're also going to be hiring a research director and an outreach and communications director. And actually, I think right now the job should hopefully have been posted for a finance director. So that is out there now. As soon as our website is up and running, we will post information about the job posting. We'll link to the official job postings, but before those are available, we'll share any information we can before then about the position descriptions. And we encourage anyone who is interested to apply.
And follow us on Twitter. We have a Twitter handle.
And LinkedIn. We're also gonna post them on LinkedIn.
Are there other questions about 5.12 and 5.13? Buzzy says, I think you said you would get back to the question about the specific role of MSDE in the drafting of the comprehensive plan. Thanks.
Oh, I was referring to, so MSDE's clear role in the not the plan itself, but MSDE's role is in developing the approval criteria for the LEA plans. MSDE does not have specifically a role in drafting the comprehensive plan. They're part of the stakeholders that are we're going to be working with as we develop the plan, but they don't have a specific role. Although obviously they have a very big role in implementing much of the blueprint.
Rachel, do you want to take us to 5.1.4?
Sure. So this is the technical assistance that the AIB and the AIB will be providing technical assistance to state agencies and entities and also local jurisdictions in supporting the blueprint. MSDE will also be working with us, particularly on the technical assistance for the LEAs. And we've already had a few initial discussions about some joint training. And so again, we're definitely looking for feedback either now or in the forum later about what kind of technical assistance would be helpful or in what areas would be helpful to provide more perhaps examples of what implementation looks like. We certainly, I think that might be really helpful, particularly in the career ladder area, and also probably in college and career readiness, a couple of areas where it's particularly complicated.
Any questions or comments about the technical assistance portion at this time? We hope that there'll be a lot of comments in the future, because to provide good assistance, we need to know what's needed. Joe.
I was going to say, even beyond technical assistance, can you talk about the structures that are established for, like, I guess for kind of collegial sharing amongst the various entities? Because, like I'm thinking about community schools where Baltimore City has done this at a high level for a long time, and they have a lot of information, knowledge, challenges that they can go through and they can share for entities across the state that are new, that are now going through and developing a community school strategy. So just sharing a little bit about how the technical assistance that's provided not just by the AIB, but that structures get created so that LEAs can share with one another. Entities that have already been working within a particular space and have done it well or at a high level can share with their colleagues who are maybe new to some aspects of the blueprint. I would say the same thing with early childhood. There's definitely some LEAs that I think are much farther ahead than others and would have a lot to share and a lot of learning that they could provide to folks that are now just developing some of their early learning strategies.
Rachel, this might be addressed when the blueprint coordinators across the LEAs, is there a requirement that they gather at specific intervals or anything to learn from each other or to?
There's not a requirement, but they do meet at least monthly. And they have been sharing amongst themselves sort of, I think probably more, maybe less focused on successes and more focused on, you know, where they've like hit challenges and roadblocks and shared around that. But one of the things that I think the AIB can do, and certainly in collaboration with MSDE, is try to bring, and MSDE has done this in some different roundtables that they've been hosting, and I know some of the board members have participated in those. So maybe we could think about sessions where, you know, whether we call them roundtables or something else, where school systems that have been implementing pieces of the blueprint already could share out sort of what their experiences have been and their successes and challenges.
And it sounds like Jeffrey has indicated in the chat that they are doing that. And if you wanted to unmute and share, you feel welcome to do that.
Yeah, hi. Just to Shamoya's question, to her question about the stakeholders' involvement, we've been, and I know many of my colleagues across the state are doing the same thing. And as Rachel referenced, the coordinators are meeting monthly, at least monthly, to talk about what we're doing with each other, but also we gather our group of stakeholders. You know, it's about every 6 weeks or so, and it has been for the last year, to talk about every element of the blueprints that we're ready for the plan template when it arrives. And I think that mirrors what's happening in many school districts, if not all school districts across the state.
All right, Shamoya has another question. Has the AIB considered funding for the blueprint BIC positions, blueprint coordinator positions? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of variation in staffing across LEAs, and we want to be sure they all have appropriate working conditions that allow them to prioritize this new complex implementation work.
In many of the systems, some of them have newly hired blueprint coordinators and others have many of them have selected existing personnel who are in the system and knowledgeable about the system. So for many of them, they're already on staff, not necessarily all of them, but many of them. There wasn't specifically funding provided for the blueprint implementation coordinators, but in the blueprint, but how can I say this? It's not a large expense for most systems. And they are joint, actually, let me also add, they are joint. This is a provision that the General Assembly added. And I think it made a lot of sense to make sure that there was coordination going at the local level between the school system and the county government and county and city government. And so the coordinators are working really closely with both the LEA. Most of them are housed in the school system, but they're working closely with the local government. And so it's a shared cost.
Right. Oops. I don't know if I'm still muted. No, I'm not. There's some additional comments there about the resources for that. So I think that maybe it's something we should keep an eye on about whether that's adequately resourced across all counties. But it sounds like there's a lot of communication amongst those coordinators. If we could switch over to 5.1.5, which is really short little phrase and only one row, but I think it's probably a pretty big deal. Rachel?
Indeed, yes. Another example of where there's a lot of unwritten subtasks now, right? So, I mean, obviously, one of the the big role of the AIB is to develop the comprehensive plan and then monitor the implementation of the LEAs in the state, across the state, the implementation of their plans, and whether they're aligned with the comprehensive plan, and whether they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then also evaluating whether it's working. So yes, there's a lot to unpack there, I think.
And I'm sure we will unpack that as this all folds out. So in interest of time, I'd like to switch over to our orange section, the expert review teams. And I know that there's folks, well, if folks are still here from MSDE, they might want to chime in on this because I know that there's work being done on this now. But Rachel, do you want to walk through that?
Sure. Yeah. And as you said, we're right sort of in the middle of this. So, so under the statute, the blueprint creates a new function, which is called expert review teams. And these expert review teams are intended to go out into the schools, specific schools, and evaluate or observe what's happening in the school and how well it's aligned with the blueprint, and also, more fundamentally, whether students are learning and progressing. And this is a brand new function in Maryland. There are a few states and districts in around the US that do them, but it's a very common practice in top performing systems, as a way of not penalizing or compliance driven, but really as a way to help to provide assistance to schools that are struggling, and also to identify and share what's working, and what are models that can be successful, and can be scaled up to other schools. And so this is the very first year that this will be implemented in fiscal 23. And we've noted that everything's a bit behind in the blueprint. And so this was not supposed to be the very first year, but it is the very first year. And so MSDE submitted their plan for the coming school year on July 1st. And AIB is in the process of reviewing that. And we'll be talking about that more at the July 28th board meeting. The statute requires, beginning next year, so not in this very first year, but next year, that about 10% of all public schools are visited each year, and that is about 140. There are about 1,400 public schools in the state. And for this coming school year, the statute directs MSDE to send expert review teams to schools that continue to have students who are experiencing learning loss due to COVID, and to try to determine why that learning loss is continuing, which is a pretty big task, and covers most of the schools in the state, quite frankly, unfortunately. And so that is, so that's where we are in the process. Once the plan is approved, AIB will be helping to train the expert review teams specifically on the blueprint. MSD has already begun to do some training for the expert review teams, and AIB is tasked with, specifically in the statute, training them on the blueprint. And so that will be happening in the fall, most likely, before the first expert review team visits. And I do believe that Ari Amerikaner from MSDE, the Chief of Staff from MSDE, is available to make some comments about the expert review teams.
Well, I am here and available. I will say, as per usual, I'm not the best person to make comments, but I will just say at the top that this is, I think, a really important, it's all really important. All of the blueprint is really important. And this is a particularly really important component. And we've been really taking this seriously and thinking a lot and spending a lot of time and resources on getting this right and getting going quickly and getting something. This is a massive and complex undertaking, and we want to get it right. And it's just so important that we get it right and that we get it right from the start, and also are sort of very focused on a continuous improvement mindset ourselves. So how do we get it as close to right as possible when we get it off the ground? And then how do we continue to improve and make sure that it continues to get better as we evolve? So we are feeling really good about where we are, and also feeling like we know we'll continue to grow and get better, you know, as we get going. And Dr. Collins, who is our Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, is here, and her team has really been leading this. And I also want to shout out Mike Hirschenfeld from MSD, who's been doing a ton of work on this as well. So Dr. Collins, do you want to give just a brief update about where we are?
Sure. Thank you, Ari. Nice to see everyone. So Rachel, I just wanted to elevate something that you mentioned that we continue to say as well, as we don't want this to be compliance driven or penalizing, but really to collect some baseline data about how schools are doing. And so it's been great to collaborate with Rachel and the team around the processes and procedures and tools, and to engage with stakeholders before we actually go out and do these official reviews. So as Rachel mentioned, we did submit the draft plan to AIB and look forward to some official feedback. Our superintendent is very big on rigorous research and practices to guide this work, especially since it's cutting edge. So we have been looking at best national practices around how to build the resources and tools that will be used to do this. We've been doing some mini pilots, talking to principals, central office staff, teachers, around ideas. We've also been making sure we're looking at what's actually going on in schools in terms of the calendar, right? We know schools are very busy, so trying to be very cognizant of when visits are scheduled, making sure folks have information ahead of time. The training that Rachel mentioned, we actually did our first training this week, not on the actual resources because they're drafts, but one of the pieces of feedback that we received, which is great, is just that calibration, right? How do you bring a team of folks to come in and do a visit and make sure that it's high quality feedback and authentic and everybody's on the same page? And so we started the training this week. I was there yesterday on day one. It's a great cross section of folks. We have about 120 reviewers that we've hired, from teachers to administrators to national experts, folks from higher ed. So it's a really exciting opportunity. We know it can be kind of anxious going into someone's space, but we really, really want to stress again what Rachel mentioned, is that we want to be able to learn and scale up best practices across the state. And that's really our ultimate goal. And as we go out and do some pilots, but also really dig into doing the actual visits, we will continue to tweak and change the resources to make sure they're providing the best information we need, so that these visits are productive and authentic, and that our schools and school systems can use them in a way to help them really feel like they're getting better.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. I have a follow-up question from the chat. As you indicated, it can be somewhat anxiety-provoking when other people come into your space and review you. Will there be information shared with the LEAs about, or with the administrators, principals, about what will be reviewed and what, like, kind of a list of things that, so they can understand what the process is?
Yes, it will. So once the AIB and AIB approves the tools and resources, they will be made public so everyone can see what those tools look like.
And there's a question too about whether the number of expert review team members you're recruiting.
So far we've hired about 120. We're trying to have a bank of reviewers because we know schedules may not permit everyone to participate when we need them to. So you always want to have some backup. So this training component that we talk about will have to be ongoing, and we'll have to continue. So that will be never ending. And as Rachel mentioned, we're collaborating on specifically what the blueprint training would look like for the reviewers as well, and coming up with some models. So that will be integrated as well.
You're on mute, Dr. Stapleton.
Sorry, there's questions that keep coming in for you. I think while we have you here, when will LEAs get the list of those who have been approved from our districts as expert reviewers?
Great question. Hopefully shortly. We worked with our superintendents and our chief financial officers in districts to come up with the MOU process. And we wanted to complete our hiring process. So once everyone is confirmed within probably the next week or so, we are planning to send that information out to the LEAs, superintendents, and chief financial officers, so folks know who has been hired if they're from their LEAs. Because we think that's important.
Yeah, question, Laura.
Yep.
Ideally, who would be on the teams?
So ideally, classroom teachers. We've had a rigorous interview process. So if you're a classroom teacher, we have folks we've hired that have been staff development teachers, classroom teachers that are looking for, that have had experience as a coach. We have principals, assistant principals, up all the way up to the CAO level. We have, central office staff.
Do you have anybody, excuse me, do you have anybody outside the system?
I'd have to go back and look at our list because we keep track of where folks have come from. But it was open up whether you're in Maryland or not based on your knowledge and expertise.
No. Anyone outside of the individual school system itself. Anyone, say, for example, from the colleges, the universities, the experts, anybody outside?
Oh, yes. Outside of the school systems, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we have hired them.
All right.
And also, I think some nonprofits or
yes, some nonprofits as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I hope we're not making this too complicated. I tend to look at this more narrowly, and I know that there are some regulatory requirements we have to meet here, but when you step back and you look at this from a layman's perspective, it appears to be far more complicated than I think it otherwise should be. And maybe I'm just seeing concerns and problems that I'm trying to get my head around why we have not been able to move faster and at a different level than what we are. And everything that I've heard sounds reasonable, but there's nothing.
I'm still hearing it.
There's nothing that. I'm sorry.
All right, go ahead.
everything that I'm hearing appears to be reasonable things that are doable. And it doesn't seem to be that there's any kind of showstopper. And which leads me to the question, why you're not much further along in this process than what I'm looking at.
I think we're actually just about where the MSD submitted the report on July 1st, and we're in the process of reviewing.
But isn't that based on an adjusted time schedule?
It is, and they've been working on it for 6 months or so, I would say. Is that about right? Yeah. So, I mean, a fair point. I mean, why couldn't all of this been implemented sooner? But I do think in terms of the timeline that we're looking at now, we're decently on track. The fall will be a pilot, so it won't be the full plan or the full deployment of the expert review teams. So, I mean, I think that's
correct me if I'm wrong.
Go ahead.
We didn't adjust this
that's
time.
something MSDE that you all are sort of still, you wanted to do more of a pilot in the fall.
That is true. Just I think largely in order to make sure that, as I said, we're not locking anything into stone, so that we can make sure we continuously improve as we roll it out. But just on the prior point, correct me if I have this wrong. I have had many things wrong in the past, but I don't believe this was part of the adjusted timeline, the expert review team timeline. This is right. This is when we, like the July 1 due date, 2022 for a deployment team. It's entirely possible I have that wrong, but I don't believe that was one of the adjustments. I believe that we have been on track as anticipated or, as expected. But as I said, I've been wrong many times before.
I'm pretty sure the plan was originally due July 1, 2021. But
okay, well, we didn't adjust it. I'm sorry. Maybe we're saying two different things. Everything got adjusted when AIB didn't exist yet, right? In terms of things that were to be turned in. That right. Much is true. Sorry.
Right.
Of course that was delayed. Yes.
Right. So obviously the AIB didn't exist on July 1st of 2021. So we're all kind of in the gray space. But so we're going to be talking more about the expert review teams on July 28th at the AIB's meeting, and the superintendent, and I'm guessing Dr. Collins and Ari will be with us on July 28th as well, to talk more about the expert review teams and what MSDE is proposing.
So if we are now moving forward, what again is the time layout of the time for the next stage of this, and where we go from there? July 1?
So right now we're in the review process, and then once the plan is approved by the AIB, the expert review teams would begin to go out into the schools this fall. And then
No, I understand that, but what must happen, the timeline prior to that?
The AIB has to approve MSDE's plan.
And so I'm trying to figure out now, back up, when that is due and when that process kicks in.
So
it seems like it's pretty quick to me.
Yeah, so we'll hear from the superintendent on July 28th, and actually we've already at the staff level been going back and forth on some revisions to some aspects of the plan, and I think once everyone's in agreement on what it should look like, the AIB either at the July 28th meeting, or if that it's not possible, definitely at the August 25th meeting, could approve the plans and start to move forward with the training.
Okay. All right. The next question I had, I guess I go back to Dr. Collins. In the reviews, are the expected reviews for the LEAs solely within their particular system internally, or is she
Can you
there?
say that? Can you say that one more time?
Are the expected protocols
Mm-hmm.
for the reviews and how you set them up, are they internal within the LEA's jurisdiction, or the external as well? In other words, do we have a set of teams selected essentially within the same jurisdiction, reviewing their own schools?
Oh, no, that's a great question. So what we've talked about, and we've talked about with Sister Rachel as well, and we've communicated with the expert review teams. The expert reviewers would not be on a team to go out and visit schools in their district. The idea is that as we look at all the reviewers, try to spread them out across the 24 LEAs.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great. Do we have more questions or comments about the expert review team process? I know we have a lot of things written down in notes to make sure that information is shared with LEAs. Are there any other things? Rachel?
I do see in the chat, Janine is asking about the blueprint training for superintendents and principals that promotes transformational leadership. And that was is something that we are, and Dr. Kerwin brought this up earlier, that we really need to focus on rolling that training out as soon as possible. This is the training that MSDE and AIB are doing in collaboration. So that's on our to-do list, and we need to focus on that. Absolutely.
If there's not more questions, I want to go back to a question on 5.1.5 that Buzzy had asked, which is a really important question about duplication and the responsibilities of MSDE versus AIB with regards to the plan. So in 5.1.5, it is AIB monitors implementation of plans and holds all entities accountable for implementation. So Rachel, if you could address this question of kind of who's in charge there? If go ahead.
Well, I mean, thank you, Buzzy, for that question. I mean, the AIB in the law is responsible for determining whether plans are being implemented as they should be, and holding everybody implementing the blueprint, accountable for implementing the policies and achieving the outcomes, which is not to say that perhaps they are implementing the policies and we're not getting the outcomes that were intended. And that is something else that needs to be uncovered. But that role is very specifically assigned to the AIB in the law, and that applies not just to LEAs and MSDE, but to other entities that that are separate from this public schools system, including higher education institutions, the Higher Education Commission, community colleges, the CTE committee, and all the various stakeholders involved in CTE and apprenticeship programs, the consortium on coordinated community support. So there are a number of players that are beyond just MSDE's authority that are required to implement the blueprint. And that, of course, is one of the reasons for the AIB, is to coordinate across the different kind of silos of government. But MSDE obviously has a really strong role in implementing the blueprint and in working with the school systems and providing guidance to the school systems and requirements on implementation. So I wouldn't call it duplication, hopefully collaboration.
Thank you, Rachel. So we have about 15 minutes left, and we have two more items to go through. 5.3 is PISA participation, and I can talk about this one, Rachel, if you want. So PISA, the Program of International Student Assessment, is a multi-country assessment where they assess 15-year-olds. So we can get a comparison. And in the in the United States, it's a sample survey where they stratify by geographic regions and then select schools within those regions and then assess 15-year-olds. We would need to make sure that Maryland is a strata all on its own so that we can get estimates for Maryland specifically that could then be compared with other countries. So we will seek to do that by that time. And then, Rachel, I turn it over to Blueprint Outcomes to you.
Great. So this is another one that seems simple, but is really, there's a lot to unpack here as we keep working through developing the comprehensive plan. So 5.4.1, AIB gathers and analyzes disaggregated data to measure progress implementing the blueprint and achieving expected outcomes. And the subtasks that we have under here right now, and there could certainly be more and certainly subtasks, is AIB identifies anticipated outcomes from blueprint implementation and the relevant indicators of progress. And then the next step would be, or the concurrent step would be, implementing a system to make sure that the data is being collected that is needed for those indicators, and then to analyze the data. This is specifically in collaboration with the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center, it's a mouthful, MLDS, and the other, other state agencies and LEA partners and higher ed partners with data. And so obviously the first step is to really lay out what the anticipated outcomes are. I think we've talked about this a number of times, that sort of the North Star of the blueprint is that students are college and career ready by the end of 10th grade and no later than when they leave high school. And a lot of other indicators to see whether kids are on track for achieving that goal could be used for indicators of progress. And the blueprint is built around a number of those, such as reading proficiency by 3rd grade, the 9th grade data on track for graduation tracker, lots of data related to looking at student achievement and disaggregated across student subpopulations, and whether the supports that those students need, whether they're getting those supports, the additional supports if they're falling behind. And so there are certainly, those are sort of the obvious ones. And I think we need to obviously lay those all out in writing and start thinking about the indicators, but there may be others. And I think it's the ones that maybe are the less obvious ones that we want to make sure we are incorporating in the plan. And hopefully, once we identify those, make sure that we're able to collect the data, because that can be a big barrier. There's a lot of things that I think are great to track, but that data might not exist right now. And actually we'll get a little later down is the new financial management system and student data system that MSDE is working on. That will be, I think, very helpful in that data, but also working with MLDS, because as Dr. Stapleton knows, the MLDS is really designed to, it's perfectly positioned to be able to support the data that we need for the blueprint, because it crosses between the various segments of K-12 higher education and into the workforce. And it's able to get that data from the various agencies and connect it up, whereas the individual agencies can't connect, what your K-12 or higher ed experience is with where you are in the labor workforce now, but or where you are from high school graduate to into college or post-secondary training. All that data is dependent on MLDS. So we're going to work very closely with our partners at MLDS.
So if we're taking each of these independently, so for 5.4.1, Shmoya had a question about what does disaggregated mean in terms of, I think, what sort of special groups one might look at. I think it depends on the pillar. I think for pillar 4, which is support every student supported. I mean, we could go down and look at every student, but I would imagine that we'd be looking at students such as English language learners, students who have IEPs or 504s. So I think that would be open depending on which of the pillars are or what it specifies. Joe?
Yeah, I guess just a question around, I mean, I know when you had talked about the staffing before, we were going to have one individual who was involved in the kind of data analysis and research, and just, I guess taking that into
at least one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, taking all that into account and, just thinking through, this is and I guess it depends on what outcome metrics we choose to look at in depth on, but I mean, there's so many different data points. And I guess just being very mindful about, not being, not being swamped by data, but really trying to figure out what are the really key data points that we are interested in looking at, working to try to move, and then also acknowledging the fact that in the grand scheme of things, we don't have a massive research and data team like, that might exist at some of the districts or at the state level. So, just taking all that into account in terms of trying to really be very precise with a few really strategic metrics that we want to track and monitor and disaggregate.
Yes, absolutely, which is also why leaning on our partners at MLDS and other agencies so much. Absolutely. I did want to point out the statute does specify some of the particular areas that the AIB has to monitor in terms of data, and whether implementation is on track, and specifically looking at student achievement gaps based on race, ethnicity, disability status, all the things that Dr. Stapleton mentioned, household income, and linguistic status, but then also student outcomes like absenteeism, disciplinary action, enrichment opportunities, meaning family involvement, school level diversity, the placement and concentration of students in those different subcategories who are assigned to different experienced teachers. So there is a good amount of detail in the statute around what what the AIB at least needs to track. Doesn't mean it necessarily has to be an indicator of progress in the plan, but it's a lot.
And to your point, Joe, we have an evaluation budget, so there is money to be spent on evaluation. I think, as Rachel said, lean on our partners. I think the MLDS has a stable of researchers who this would be an unfunded mandate if we just told them that they have to do these analyses. So I think we may need to look at using our evaluation budget to offset some costs for them.
Yeah.
And Charlemar made the very important point that to understand, especially for evaluating implementation, to understand how what progress is happening or not happening and why. You really can't answer a why question with quantitative data. You need qualitative data. So that is something that MLDS is not positioned to do because it's really a data repository. So we would need to think about strategies using our evaluation budget to look at those important questions. Are there other items? We're checking time. We have 5 minutes. We need to do the rest of these points in 5 minutes, Rachel.
We will have another meeting where we can certainly continue the conversation. I did want to note, because I think it's a really important comment that Tim Guy has put in the chat box, that we have there are the ESSA plans now and AIB accountability, and to make sure that there are some natural connections between those two, so that the state and the priorities for the federal funds are aligned. And I think I would add, although ESSER plans have been in the works for a couple of years now, but there are still funds, and MSDE, for example, is using their ESSER set aside funds for example, the LEADS grants, many of which are aligned with beginning to implement the blueprint. So that federal accountability and also, I would say, use of federal funds is aligned to the extent possible with the blueprint. I think that's a really good point. Do we want to stop there?
Yeah, I think so. I think I sense the tiredness from the faces and the names on the
There was a question that was popped up there, I thought. Was there a question there?
We've also heard a request for an overall evaluation of all the reports education agencies are required to submit to create better alignment for state mandates. Maybe a legislative priority?
Maybe.
To evaluate.
Yeah.
I always hesitate to, there are lots of reasons why different reports are mandated, lots of very good reasons. So that may not all be related to the blueprint, but certainly any that seem to be related to the blueprint, I think we could certainly take a look at that.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Laura, thank you so very much for guiding us through this afternoon's conversation.
Sure.
There'll probably be some additional questions or comments that we can carry over in our August 4th meeting. I want to again thank everyone for your participation, everyone for the questions and following through on the process that we've outlined today. I thought it went fairly well. Again, thank you, Rachel and the staff. We will have an opportunity to review your additional questions if you have any comments. This is an ongoing process, and we want to make sure we get it right, to get as much participation as possible, but to be as transparent as possible and to try to meet our deadline for responding to the overarching framework for getting our comprehensive plan together. This is a work in progress. As I said before, we're building the plane as we fly it. And today, at least we get off the ground and we'll see that we're heading in the right direction. Anything else? Rachel?
No, I would just remind everybody that next Wednesday at 1 o'clock, so Wednesday, not Thursday, it's a day early. We're going to do this same format because we got off the ground for pillars 3 on college and career readiness and pillar 4 on resource equity. And so the registration link has been posted in the hearing schedule. So please register if you'd like to participate in next week's meeting. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
And our meeting with the superintendent is scheduled for
July 28th.
Okay.
Will be the week after. So next week we have pillars 3 and 4. On Thursday, July 28th, starting at 1 p.m., the AIB will have a meeting, which includes a presentation by Superintendent Chaudhary. And then after that meeting, most likely the timing, we're still working out the timing on the pillar 1 set working session, but it will most likely be after the AIB meeting, but it may be in the morning. So stay tuned for more information on that.
Let me just remind people again that in order for the AIB to be successful, we need the full cooperation and support of a large number of entities throughout the state, but none more important than the state board and the superintendent. So our intent is to work with them and to make certain that we do this in a collaborative manner. It is to our advantage to make sure that we dot all the I's and cross all the T's and bending over backwards to have as much cooperation and collaboration as possible. So they are an essential part of this. You heard AIB a lot today, but if you look at many of the charts and diagrams that you saw there, a good part of this work at least starts with the board. We are in some degree a facilitator, and in another degree, we are evaluator and trying to make certain that everything stays on track. But much of this starts with them, and I want to thank them as well and everyone else for participating today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.